Happy New Year. All right. Welcome, everybody. It is 6:31, and I'd like to call the District 204 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Marilyn, can you please call the roll?
Member Alvarez.
Present.
Member Vita Daniels.
Present.
Member Dillon.
Here.
Member Giannotti Fry.
Present.
Member Gretsch.
Here.
Member Strewing.
Here.
Member Thomas.
Here.
Great. Let's all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to see everyone again. The first item on our agenda is public participation, but we don't have anybody, so we'll just jump right in. So the first official agenda item is Strategic Plan Goal 2 update. Dr. Waterman.
Thank you, President Gretsch. I'll just jump in real quickly. Just to remind the board, this is our fourth strategic plan goal update of the year. We discussed Goal 3 in October, Goal 2 in November, Goal 4 in December, and tonight we're excited to share an update on Goal 2, which is all related to like learning environment and supports. Before we get to that, though, I just want to remind the board again and community as well that everything related to our strategic plan is on our website. And so that includes the goals, the aligned strategies, both the current year and all previous years, priority lists, the data targets, the progress reports, and just a little bit of information as a reminder about how we arrive at those priority lists each year. That process starts in late April, early May, which, believe it or not, will be here before we know it, where we will bring our strategic plan action teams together to review all the progress from this current year, start drafting those priority lists for next year, and then that list is discussed and vetted through a variety of leadership teams all the way up until late June, which is when the board will vet and analyze and discuss those priority lists as well, and then we kind of roll into next year ready to go. So tonight, Dr. Owens, as goal champion of Goal 2, will lead our discussion on that. And she also has some visitors that she's going to introduce as well. So I'll kick it over to Dr. Owens.
Thank you, Dr. Waterman. And Dr. Waterman is going to drive the slide deck for me, so I may remind you to either go forward or stop. I'm grateful each year for the opportunity to highlight the work and progress of Goal 2 of our strategic plan for the Board of Education. As the goal champion, I have the privilege of collaborating with colleagues across the district to support students according to the goals and strategies that are outlined by our plan, and I cannot emphasize enough that there are many, many, many people involved in every aspect of executing this work and achieving our goals. Our strategic plan has been instrumental in sharpening our focus and prioritizing our needs, and with that roadmap, our staff, as you'll see tonight, have dug in and have accomplished so much. A counselor for our current senior class, correct? In just a minute, I will turn things over to them to provide some more in-depth information about the meaningful and exciting work within the Student Services Division. Next slide. So this is just the general slide. You have seen this before. This is on the website and has remained the same since our strategic planning process. A few years back, it is our goal, which is learning environment and supports, and our ultimate goal is providing a safe, positive, inclusive, and engaging learning environment. The three strategies that you see underneath are, again, the three strategies that were agreed upon by the larger committee of those 80-plus individuals. So building confidence for our students, self-sufficiency, wellness, by improving our intervention systems and our other supports for students both academically and socially, engaging all of our stakeholders in creating a positive climate, and then exploring opportunities to enhance the school day and the year that result in increased participation in our curricular activities or our extracurriculars. And so we'll talk about the things that we're doing to help meet all of those. The next few slides are a bit overwhelming, I'm not going to lie. Based on the amount of information that you see. But the purpose of these slides is just to show you our guiding task list that our Goal 2 action team reviews and how we keep track of all the different initiatives and work that is occurring each year to help us meet our goals. Our Goal 2 team has been meeting since the inception of our plan, and that team reviews and determines the priority areas and then the key work. And our key work in our Goal 2 falls into really data-driven practices, school safety, and a supportive learning environment. It is important to note that the work that occurs within our goal depends upon and overlaps with all of our other goals. So many of the items that you see coexist with work that is led by the other goal champions. And as Brian said, we've already heard about most of the other goals, but they really do work sort of symbiotically to work together and get us to the end result. You can keep going through these, Brian. They are just the task list. There we go. This is also a lot of words on a slide, but I wanted to just reflect our action planning team. You see them on the left. That is the group that gets together. And many of the members of the team have been part of this team for multiple years. This group serves really as a think tank and a check and balance to ensure that our work continues to meet the needs demonstrated by our students and our student data and is connected to our strategies and goals. The list on the right are the items that I'd like to highlight in the time since this presentation last year. So some of the things that we've been working on since we were at this table in January of 2024. So at the top, we continue to utilize our Panorama and 5 Essentials data and have combined that with some student focus groups this year to glean even more information to help support a positive climate and a culture of belonging. So we administered the Panorama surveys in the fall and in the spring, and our responses overall really have stayed fairly stable. And with that, we decided to take a little bit of a deeper dive and start asking students more specific questions about how and why they were answering questions in certain ways to see if we could get a bit more information in order to take action on how we can continue to improve that culture and climate. So we are continuing to administer those. Dr. Tyrell and Dr. Rowe have been really helpful in running focus groups and using some of the groups of students that they meet with regularly as part of those focus groups. So again, trying to dig in. When we administer those surveys, it's typically during study hall time for students, and the questions are not specific to a specific classroom or place in the building, and so we really want to find out if a student says they feel like they belong and feel great at school, what's happening that makes them feel that way. If a student on the other side says, I don't feel so much like I belong or I'm having difficulty, is that across the board? Is that happening in certain areas? So it's really a way for us to dig in and get more information. We've talked about using some of the very specific questions on the Panorama survey in classes or in groups as almost like exit tickets to get a little more leading information from students, and so I think that's something we'll continue to explore so that we can really use that survey data to take action and not just have it as a monitoring tool. The Student Services team is going to share a lot more in a minute, but for the first time, we administered the Signs of Suicide screener to our sophomore class this year. It was a really huge proactive step in identifying students who may be struggling with depression and or feelings of self-harm and connecting them immediately to support. So due to the successful implementation, again, you'll hear much more about that in a few minutes. Our plan is to provide that same program to senior class in the spring. So it was a really big step for us and something that we had not been able to accomplish for a variety of reasons previously. Our code of conduct was completely revised and approved by the board in June of 2024. This was largely the work of the Parent-Teacher Advisory Behavioral Interventions Board Committee, as well as a significant amount of work on the part of Dr. Tyrell, John Grunke, our athletic director, Peter Geddes, our activities director, and our legal counsel. The updated code aligns with our desire to cultivate a restorative community, and that was really important to our group above all, that code was aligned with that desire. It ensures maximum participation by as many students as possible in our extracurricular and athletic activities, but it's also based on the understanding that adolescents make mistakes and they can be held accountable, but they can also repair harm and be welcomed back into our community. Our school safety webpage was launched and outlines our evidence-based beliefs that school safety requires a complex combination of preparedness, positive relationships, and a culture of belonging and shared responsibility. We actually just met yesterday with Michelle and Valerie, our two attorneys from Hodges, to work with our APs and our associate principals, and we were just talking about different processes and procedures that we use, and it was interesting because one of the first things Michelle said to us was typically when we see schools that are struggling with certain issues, it is a culture and climate issue, and so just giving us that reinforcement we needed that by looking at school safety through the lens of culture and climate, that's a really important thing for us to keep doing and to continue focusing on, because again, when people feel good when they're here and feel like they're included and belong, the chances of other behaviors occurring are far less. So it was just another reminder for us, but again, we say that this a lot because it's true, but school safety is the most important thing we do here, and it feels really good to be able to articulate that approach to our staff and to our students and family and community. Our work in this area, as we also say, will never be done, and as you see on our task list, there are many individual items about school safety that are included, and I don't ever see that list really getting shorter because we're always going to be reviewing and revising and making sure that we are doing all the things we need to do to keep students and staff and families safe. The School Day Research Committee was busy last year, beginning in, I think it was January of last year, and we completed our first phase, which was an exploration of current research on high school bell schedules, a dive into the data on our students' use of support rooms and drop-in centers here at LT, a comparison of our district and other high schools, not only within our conference in our area, but also some out-of-state schools that we had relationships with. And we were really trying to gain an understanding also of the necessary planning and communication that's required for a large-scale change of any kind to a schedule. The committee agreed after looking at all of the information and analyzing all the data that we are going to remain on a traditional schedule at this time, but we really want to target our efforts at enhancing our school day interventions. So with that in mind, we started this year off with members of our committee attending 8 different site visits that provided firsthand opportunities for us to learn from other schools and different systems, ask questions about how they plan for and continue to monitor their implementation, and just brainstorm in general about ideas that may work at LT. So our committee comes back together next week to review all the data, other schools. Every time you're at another school, it hits you how much we can learn from each other, and we don't do that nearly enough, so it was really nice to spend this first semester doing that. And I know we had a lot of there were similar, people that went to many of the visits and then some that were in and out of different visits, and it was just nice to have a different group of people kind of looking at all of that. In general, our multilingual program continues to do well. Our population has grown steadily over the past 10 years. I'm sure we have more students as of the start of the semester today, because that's just how things roll. But this year, 36 of those students are newcomers, meaning they've been in our country for less than 3 years. 70% of our multilinguals are long-term, meaning they've received services for 7 or more years. Approximately 45% of our multilingual students are duly identified as multilingual in special education. That is a high percentage. However, most of the students arrive to us already identified in both, so that's something that we're monitoring. We did go through the second phase of an ISB multilingual audit in the fall, and they were looking at some of the metrics that were looked at in the first phase of the audit, and then they actually came for an on-site visit, which was nerve-wracking and exciting all at the same time. They came in, they spoke with multiple staff members, a couple of parents, some students, and then they were in a couple of different classrooms. And I was in the meeting, Scott was in the final meeting at the end of the day as well, and it was a point of pride for us that they were overall just very impressed with what we're doing, and really highly complimentary of the work that's going on in the classroom. So that was exciting. I know our multilingual teachers have been working really hard. They are very busy people bouncing around to cover all those graduation requirements, but they're doing a fantastic job in really integrating the standards, the WIDA standards, with the classes, and planning for all kinds of different content areas, and so it was exciting to get that feedback. There's certainly things that we're going to keep working on with our multilingual program, but it's been great. And due to the support here, we have hired a bilingual coordinator, Julie Jacobo. You heard from her last year, but we've also been able to hire 6 teachers that are helping to complete our program, which is fantastic. A big celebration is that, per our most recent report card, and we did mention this earlier in the year, but the percentage of students proficient on Access for ELs increased by 1%, and the percentage of students exiting our EL program increased by 2%. So we are starting to see some of those gains. They might be incremental at this point, but they are gains that we just haven't been able to realize in the past, so it's really exciting. And then special education co-teaching. We're in the 3rd year of implementation, so we now have, it's crazy, nearly 65 teachers co-teaching, 12 different graduation requirements, with the final 4 requirements will be added next year. So that's Algebra 2, Physics, English 4, and Consumer Economics. So that is just awesome. So the first class, if you remember, we phased in our co-teaching program within special ed. So we started with the freshman year, and those students have been able to take any and all graduation requirements they need as co-taught. So they will round that out senior year next year, and then we'll have the full complement ready for all of our students as they come in. We have continued to work with nationally recognized experts, Dr. Barron and Dr. Witzel, and they provide training and feedback to our teams approximately 3 times a year. Rural level can be slightly easier. At the secondary level, it can be quite difficult, and they have been very impressed with how we've been able to manage that. So we're excited, and we've got, forget how many of us, 6 of us heading to that conference in March, so we're excited. You can go to the next slide.
Can I
This
ask
is-
a quick question?
Oh,
Sorry.
sure.
Slay, I was wondering, that ISB audit that was done for the multilingual
Yes.
program, is that something that they was required of us? And has that ever been required before? Because I don't feel that I've ever heard us talk about.
They started it a couple years ago, and they called it desktop monitoring, meaning there was no on-site visit. They just wanted to look at some of our metrics and
Collateral,
evidence.
okay,
And
yeah.
so we sent that all to them. We went through a process where we met with them online. They looked at all of our material and told us what we needed to change or improve. And then we didn't hear much after that. And then a kind of a new group from the state is involved. And so they came back and said, we want to follow up on that audit. And we want to add in the piece of the on-site visit. So I think, if I understand it, they would be potentially back to visit within the next year to 2 years.
Okay,
So-
that's awesome. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that before, so that's why I was kind of curious what prompted
I-
that, how it came
I
about.
think the lift is huge, and I think they were probably understaffed when they
Sure.
started, and so I think it's taken them a little bit of time to
Good.
figure out exactly how they're going to execute all of that. But it was a really great team that came and gave
Sounds
us
like
some
it,
great
yeah.
feedback and ideas for, even the first team that came through really gave us the idea of doing our bilingual program as a co-taught model, and they've been able to offer some good technical advice. So
I love it.
one thing that came out of it that we haven't implemented yet, we're waiting, but we are going to be working with a company to help us do some of the translation and progress monitoring first, capability of reporting to families progress, but also us having a much more specific ability to monitor progress of our students.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Sorry.
I think this is all great. And I love like the co-teaching and obviously the multilingual programs and all of that. I think it's really great. And so much progress. So it's obviously that there's been a lot of work and so much progress. So it's obviously that there's been a lot of work.
I can tell you quickly, parents were able to opt students out.
Okay, that's
and
okay.
that. So we did offer that, and they just completed a quick, they either called us or completed a quick survey to say,
That-
I'm not
okay,
interested.
that was my-
So,
okay,
yep.
perfect.
And
Okay,
we
thanks.
didn't have many, I will tell you that, but we definitely offered that as an
Okay.
option. Next slide. This is just a snapshot. You've seen this. This was the kind of the report card of the progress after the 2023-24 school year on our metrics. I really show this to say that our goal action team, we keep track of these metrics. We look at these metrics. These are definitely more lagging indicators for us, or more summative. We look at these metrics. These are definitely more lagging indicators for us, or more summative information. So these are important to us. We keep track of this. We look at it, but we're also looking at a lot of other leading indicators and other data to keep us on track. So this is something, again, our team pays attention to this. It's important to us, but we also have so many other ways that we monitor how our work is going and how students are performing based on the work that we're doing.
A quick
Oh,
question.
sure.
On this particular scorecard, when it comes to the metrics, is there kind of a range in which you have identified? For example, I look at student behaviors and I see the baseline is 92, the target is 91, and we're at 88. I'm just wondering, is there some kind of a range that you've defined as, okay, this is red and yellow, green, and is it the same for all, or does it
For
vary?
individual students, you mean?
Oh, for
or just
for
for the
meeting
school?
these particular targets. Yeah.
Yeah, not so much a range. What we do, that's where our goal action team comes together and kind of says, okay, where are we at with our data right now? Where, kind of really who and where are the students that maybe aren't meeting this metric? And then where are we trending? And what are we doing to address that? So our behavior, the student behavior that's specific to students who have 0 or 1 behavior infractions on the year. So now that pushes us into, okay, for students who have more than that, what are we doing? Let's look at that group and see how we can address students who are having more than that number of infractions. What we're trying to do now, it is kind of vague or broad, so we're trying to figure out, okay, with that group that's not meeting that target, how are we specifically intervening on those students in order to move the needle to those targets? But I will say that those targets aren't based on, it's not like there's a research basis for that particular target. It's more of how have things been going here at LT throughout the years, and what do we think is a achievable goal that's also pushing us forward, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So our team looks at kind of where we were and where we think we can be based on what it is we're actually doing to affect the behaviors of
Yeah,
students.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Just to add one note too to that, the actual colors on this chart though represent the comparison of the most recent data we have, which is 23-24, to the year before that,
Yes.
which was 22-23. So essentially, green means that we met the target we had set for last year. Yellow means we didn't meet the target, but we made progress from the year before. Red means we didn't make progress from the year before.
Yeah,
Got
sorry,
it.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's
No.
where you're
The
going.
colors
Yeah.
for this chart,
colors
yes,
for
now
this
I get
chart,
it.
yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
Really, that was it. I just wanted to show the example. And then this, I put this in, I know obviously there are new members around the table, but just what is student services in our district, who is included in that? So nothing more than just really informational, but it's really our, our AP office, our multilingual learners, our school counseling and student supports, and special education, and just listing for everyone so that you know who our administrators are within those divisions, then who are the other work groups within the divisions or programs, then who are our partners. And really, there's other partnerships that are not listed, but those are kind of our most frequent partners. So again, none of this work is done in a vacuum. There are so many people and outside partnerships that we rely on in order to meet the needs of our students, and that's really important to us to continue those collaborations and increase those collaborations where we can and to meet our students' needs at the end of the day. And then we have to meet those needs and the professional learning involved, and then we implement, and then we're doing program review. So that's really, just that basic kind of cycle of improvement that we rely on all of our teams to make sure that the work we're doing is having the desired outcome. So really using this slide as a transition to the team that's here that are going to talk about this is what they're doing on a daily basis within their teams and the things that they are implementing on the ground with students. So I will turn it over to Mr. Eder at this point to get us started, and they are going to do a deeper dive into student services. Over the past few years, for those of you who have been here, we've highlighted our co-teaching and special education, our multilingual program, and so this year we thought it was timely to take a look at student services. That's great.
Thank you, Leslie. Good evening, and I am really honored to have the opportunity to be here with some of my team members to share the work that's been happening with our team, the way we've been supporting students, and what that's really looked like. So, again, Kate Walgamuth, our Assistant Division Chair and 504 Coordinator, is here with me, and she will highlight the work with the Signs of Suicide program. Tammy Miller, school counselor for the past 3 years and an English teacher in the district for a long time. And she's a school counselor now with the senior team and has 3 years of school counseling experience. So tonight what you're going to hear, we're going to highlight 3 particular efforts and programs, but you're going to hear a continual theme of how we have really shifted our work to be more data informed. And not only looking and analyzing and collecting data, but really turning that into action and turning that into work specifically with students to try to make sure that we are identifying and supporting the right students within the right areas that they are showing needs. So as I mentioned, our signs of suicide, which Kate will highlight more. One thing to go back to actually within student services, we wanted to make sure we highlighted 3 important areas. There's 3 domains within the student services area. Academics, obviously, we're a school, we educate. It's an important work that we do as school counselors, social workers, and team members, but also the social emotional side of student wellness, and then also post-secondary. So the 3 areas we're going to highlight have thoughtfully and mindfully highlighted each one of those areas. So before those specific areas, going along with what Leslie mentioned, I wanted to do a quick reminder of just the before and after of the transformation and enhancement of personnel within our division. As you know, and we are very proud to say, this work that we're going to talk about today would not be possible without the commitment that you all have made as a Board of Education to for our students in the community. Lower caseloads of students allows for our team members to offer additional supports and programs for students who show they need more support. It also allows us to work more proactively to identify students before we start to see major emergencies within classrooms, within students' social emotional wellness. So not only is it proactive, but it's avoiding the emergencies that simply our team was spending most of their time with before we had additional staff. So if you look at some of those numbers, our school social workers prior to 2022 had about 950 students on their caseload. They're now down to approximately 500. School counselors have decreased their caseloads by about 70 students per grade level. So this allows for not only for us to understand our students and get to know them better, but also to work more creatively and collaboratively together to provide more support for more students. So in other words, thank you. The work we're sharing today would not be possible without these shifts in personnel. So entering into the 22-23 school year, knowing that we had additional school counselors, we had additional social workers, we knew that the work that we were doing to support students needed to start to look different. And so following Leslie's model of professional development, we partnered with Dr. Beth Gilfillan, who's an associate professor of school counseling education at Northeastern Illinois University. And she helped facilitate and do workshops with Kate and I, co-facilitating on what data-informed student services work looks like. How do school counselors who are inherently social, emotional, and social workers, how do you use data? What data is good data? How do you collect it? Who do we need to work with in order to have it? And what do we do once we have it? And so really we used our school improvement days during all four of those that year to work with her. Our team spent a lot of good, hard work looking at their grade levels, understanding their students, and seeing students from that side of data spreadsheets versus anecdotal stories that we hear and we respond to and do the good work in that way as well. So that year, we challenged each grade level team to what we said, just pick one thing, start small, right? This was new work for them to do, and we said pick one area of your grade level that you can see a need, and then create a plan, deliver the plan, and measure the plan. And so that was a really great exercise for each one of our grade level teams to just pick one area that they wanted to do. That is, of course, in addition to all of the other work that they did that year, but really just to see the work and how it can be measured and be successful. So that was really the kickoff in our learning as a team in the data-informed work within student services. Another byproduct of that time with Dr. Gilfillan was our team determined that we really needed to go back to our group guidance curriculum. This is the work that's happened for years with school counselors and all students. Every student goes through 4 group guidance lessons each year. We really realized we needed to go back and start looking at state standards, Castle SEL standards, aligning this work with those areas. And so we applied and were approved for a summer workshop that following year. It was also the year we were adopting School Links, so it was great timing to not only embed data-driven work, align with SEL standards, but also incorporate the School Links platform in this work for all of our students. So that timing really worked well for our team to really kick off some of this work. So one area that our team definitely decided coming off of that we needed to really look at was social emotional universal screener, something Leslie and I had talked about for a couple of years at that time. And so I'm going to hand it over to Kate and let Kate talk a little bit about the delivery of that program. She's going to share a little bit with us.
Hello, thank you for having us. As Drew mentioned, when we were working with Dr. Gilfillan, she was showing us how we could be using all of this data that we already had, right, to find students, to reach students, to identify students. Quickly, our staff, and it was really exciting, started to talk about, like, okay, how can we get more data? Like, how can we reach more students? And again, I think a lot of this is thanks to the growth of our staff. But essentially, signs of suicide, again, is one of the many things our department has been able to do to collect more data and analyze more data. We partnered with Alyssa's Mission. Alyssa's Mission is an agency that funds and implements evidence-based SOS signs of suicide programming in over 350 middle schools and high schools, 20 counties and 120 suburbs. And we were really honored to be able to partner with them because they were able to assist us with a lot of the components of SOS programming, including all that planning, opting out, all of those things, in teaching and training for our staff. So essentially SOS, obviously it teaches students, right, about signs of suicide. It also helps us identify students. So the goals are to teach youth about depression and that it is a treatable illness in themselves, friend, family member, ultimately prevent teen suicide, but as well to train our school professionals. So recognize at-risk students and then take appropriate action. So what signs of suicide is a lesson, which is followed by an evidence-based universal screener. And so we, as Leslie mentioned, Drew mentioned, so we delivered that to our sophomore class of 2027 in the fall. The lessons were delivered by our PE and health teachers. We plan to deliver or facilitate the programming with seniors this spring, and again have the lessons delivered by our PE teachers. A lot of our PE teachers and our PE programming, as you guys are probably very well informed, is doing a lot of work, social emotional work as well, so it fits kind of into their curriculum. The SOS lessons were spread out over 3 days, and so there was some rhyme and reason to that, but approximately 300 students on any given day. And then school counselors and social workers were able to follow up with students as applicable. And I think this is the key piece to, I don't know how much you guys know about SOS, and maybe a lot, but the key piece is that the lesson is given and the universal screener is given at the end, and the universal screener has to be scored immediately. And following the screener, a student is given, rating, how at risk are they, and depending on that rating, they have to be followed up with immediately before they leave the building. So having the resources to do that immediately in the school day and reach those students and then connect them to resources is not an easy task, but with the staff that we had available in the growth of our department, it enabled that to be able to happen. One other thing that just to mention, and we're new to this, and so we're excited to see, but 90%, Alyssa's mission had told us 90% of schools that use this over multiple years had seen an increase in students seeking and support for themselves or friends. So that was a huge number for us. You can go ahead to the next slides, and you're probably going to click a whole bunch because I maybe put on like a
Fancy.
transition. So this is just some of our data. So there's a pretest given prior to the lesson, and our average score on the pretest for our students was 84%. The post-test given afterwards was 89%. To highlight all of the questions, there was improvement in. To highlight two of the questions, obviously there was a 17% increase to students getting the question about depression as an illness that doctors can treat correct. So that was great to see. The next question, there was a large increase. There was an 18% increase in students getting the question, if I talk to someone about their suicidal feelings, it may give them the idea to kill themselves, which is false. And there was an 18% increase from before and after the lesson. And then to look at, like probably quite a few, to look at some of the data from afterwards. So we had, at the time, a total enrollment of 861 students in our class of 2027. I think that's our lowest enrollment class. Of those 861, 771 participated in the lesson. So that goes to the question, the previous question about if any students were opted out or if there was an option for that. Yes, obviously that's 90 students, so there were a few different things there. Our teams worked with students maybe that were currently hospitalized, recently hospitalized, to talk to their families about if this would be appropriate for them to participate in or not, or might be a trigger. So some students were opted out based on identification by our staff. Some students' parents opted out, and then there obviously were some students absent. Of the 771 students that participated in the lesson, only 2 of them declined to do the screener at the end of the lesson. And then boiling down all of the screeners that were scored, we had 59 students that required follow-up. Some required follow-up immediately, some were in like the week. We were able to follow up with all of our students within 2 days, which was great. This is pretty large percentage lower than what Alyssa's mission sees as their average. And so there's obviously a question as to why. I'm sure there are many factors as to why our number was lower in terms of students that required follow-up. I do personally believe in just seeing how our SST teams work and the support we provide students. I do believe there is a correlation between our staff to student ratio and how well we know our students, and that students are already connected to quite a few resources in the building, as well as our PE department is administering lessons.
Having any risk factor that the counselor and social worker weren't already aware of that student and said, okay, yeah, I'll go talk with them. I've talked with them before. So that was, to your point, Kate, I think that speaks to the fact that our staff know our kids really well.
So then if we look
Kate,
a
real
little bit,
quickly.
sorry.
So like, did you, so I think this is great, like, I mean, especially that so many that were identified that you could help. So I have 2 questions. One, did you alert the parents if there was a situation? Okay, so that, the
So
kids had to
all-
give, did they give
yeah.
permission in that survey to alert the parents?
Say that one more time.
Like, did the survey give permission to the kids to, that you would alert their parents?
So anytime, so the people that were doing the follow-up assessments were our social workers, some of our school psychologists and counselors. And anytime we work with students, we let them know if there's a risk is identified by the student. So not always is a family informed, but in this situation, we didn't have any students that declined that we,
What would happen if a student did decline?
depending on the level of risk, there is.
Okay.
There are times where, unfortunately, we have to let the student know that because of their safety, and their level of risk, we are required to let their.
Okay. I didn't know if, like, where that was, you know, like, if it was confidential, what they told you, and you
Great
didn't.
question.
So-
We usually set up the parameters of confidentiality as soon as you work with the student. So as soon as, speaking from a school psych background or social work background, as soon as a student starts working with you, you say, you know, what we talk about is confidential, but if you ever talk about, you know, hurting yourself or others, then that's something that I would not be able to keep. It's important to set that up
I just want to make
immediately.
sure, because I wouldn't never want somebody to confide and then be like, oh my
For sure.
gosh, they've told my parent, you know what I mean?
For
Like,
sure.
to see, I
Yep.
just wanted to understand that better.
100%.
And then, did you also, like, for kids that were, like, had a PE waiver or something like that, did you include them in this also, or were they, not part of this?
That's a great question, and it was a logistical nightmare at some points, but no, we did. So
Okay.
the exceptions to a PE teacher delivering the lesson, there were 2 groups of students. PE waiver, some that just happen to have both health and PE second semester, because of our semester courses sophomore year, that 2 of our counselors administered the lesson to those students, so they received a pass to go down the period it was being administered to D203 at South Campus, and so the lesson was administered to those students at that time.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And then the final slide and numbers. So looking at those 59 students that were required further assessment, 40 of them were referred on for additional services. Some of them were new services, some of them were just additional. Maybe our staff was already working with them, or they were already working with an outside provider. This was higher, so 68% was our average. This was higher. 50% was the average that Alyssa's mission let us know. And why was our percentage higher? You know, I think, I don't know. And I think maybe we can start to gather some kind of hypotheses on these. I do think that the screener did a good job. Not sure if it has to do with the where we delivered it. Again, we're in PE and health classes. There's a relationship there. We weren't doing it in auditorium style. So I think also just we observed Riverside Brookfield do this lesson, and they had, a method to the word out. I think really interesting here, and again, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse in terms of like how much the additional staff has helped us. But this last number here of 33 of the 40 students that were referred to additional services within LT. You know, I worked in the special education department up until 3 years ago, and our social workers were really working with those special education students, and it's like, I don't know if this would have, even if we had the staff to administer SOS, I'm not sure that our staff would have been able to take on this many more, so that, because this was just the 2 social workers, right? So 33 of the 40 were referred to additional services at LT, which was really exciting to see. So I'm going to turn it back over to Drew to talk about some other of the Tier 2 supports.
Actually, I've got just some more questions
Okay.
about, unless anybody else does.
Tackle that first before you go on, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I applaud you guys for doing this. I think this is a program that's near and dear to my heart. We've used this in our district for about 5 years, and I will tell you, at least from what we've seen, numbers start high and they get lower as you go because kids have understood the message. They realize the importance of this. And you begin to didn't know about. I guess that's my big question, because every time we do this, we go in our schools and we find
Yeah.
kids that had no previous connection to any school,
Sure.
no plan, like nobody knew, and this kid had an active plan. Like their parents didn't know, their friends didn't know, the school didn't know. Did you guys find kids like that?
We have
Okay.
one of the 50, so I'm sorry, those and LT services, and that's why that number is above 40, somewhere for both. I think we had 9 students, no, I don't, I'm sorry,
Okay.
I won't quote that number, but we had 1. We only had 1 student that came out as an imminent risk after the follow-up assessment, which means that we are recommending that they receive an ER assessment outside of LT. And it was a student that was not surprising to us, was not opted out because it had been a while. And actually the student, after having a meeting with the family, it was really quite amazing because the individual that did his screener and then did the follow-up was very, very appreciative that this conversation happened, but since the person hadn't worked with them before, they were coming in blind, and some of the stuff he was saying was concerning, and so to not know the history there, but it was just so great. The student had like stopped seeing his counselor and then restarted seeing that counselor. The mom went back to therapy. I mean, it was just really awesome to see, even though this is a student that didn't end up going to the ER, like the safety plan that was created was really great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that, you know, this program, it actually saves lives of kids that nobody knew about. The only other comment that I wanted to mention is, I'm really glad to hear you guys are doing this for seniors. I was just I'm part of a Illinois Suicide Prevention Alliance committee with the state. We had a meeting today, actually, and we went over statistics that they went over statewide. And what really shocked me from that is 80% of students who die by suicide are 17 to 24.
Mm-hmm.
That number shocked me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the kids that leave school and the protections that they have. And I know Alyssa's Missions program with the BSAD and the Signs of Suicide talks a lot about getting those referrals connected to kids so that when they leave our schools, they know where to go and get help. So I guess I know it's a ton of work. It's exhausting by the end of the day, but I really applaud the efforts for doing this. I think
Is that
it's
national
huge.
numbers, Tim?
That's statewide.
State, that's just state, 80%.
Yeah, so
Okay.
1,093
Wow.
from 2015 to 22, and 268 for 10 to 16. So, I mean, those are telling numbers. And those are based on coroner's reports. So, it's a big factor. And again, I know the work that goes into it is a lot. So, but truly, that's a near and dear to my heart.
Tim, that's really great. We, when we went through the process of adopting the program and planning, we landed on sophomores, knowing really the health curriculum, the exposure for students of the mental health unit and trying to work that in. And then also just bandwidth of grade level teams was a consideration. And as we sat around, as Leslie mentioned, in our, call it like the huddled room, right, like hunkered down, waiting for the things to fly in, we were talking about looking at, like, should we stay with sophomores and seniors? Because the idea, to Joey's recommendation, was for seniors, it's an incredible going away gift to parents, right? Like, we screened your child, like, but this is important as you go into a major transition. But we started to look at our hospitalization numbers, which we track every year, and say, okay, when do we have the most hospitalizations? And freshmen really are a huge number for us. And so we started to kick around. It's like, okay, well, we don't know freshmen. So what we were talking about, do we stick with sophomores and seniors? Do we transition to different grade levels? How would that work on the larger scheme? So that's really good information, though, for us to continue thinking about. We're obviously committed to sophomores and seniors now and the program in the future, but continuing to try to think critically about if that's the right age to do this program with. So.
Do you guys know if any of your feeder districts are implementing this?
So Guri does. They have for a number of years. I am in the process of I'm gonna be talking with them about it, about our adoption of the program. We do ongoing articulations with the principals, and so I'm hoping in the spring to make sure that they have taken some time to talk about this and make sure that they know. Jody mentioned that the really great, districts, do have correlation with their middle schools, and so the more students are exposed to the messaging, the more they understand. So that's a goal for us to work with our principals from the middle schools as well. So.
Very cool. Thank you.
And
I'm
I just
sorry,
want-
did you, okay. Did you say the seniors are getting it, they'll get it this year in the spring?
In March.
And would that be, I mean, they won't be tied to the PE program, right? Would they be doing it, or will they?
We're
Will
gonna
you be doing
stick with PE program.
You are, okay.
Yeah.
And then, my last question, I have a question with that, sorry. Seniors, I don't remember. I'll think about it again.
It'll come to you.
Thanks.
Just to reiterate what everybody has said, I mean, you guys are blowing me away. This is all so wonderful, so thank you. Staffing has come up a lot, and I'm sure will continue, but I just wanted to get a temperature check from you with where you are now. Does it feel good? Do you feel that it's been right-sized enough to mitigate burnout? Because there is a lot of burnout. Like, are you in a good place with enough staff? Are you building to an ask? I don't know. So I just wanted
How
to.
do you bring that up? We just want 16 more counselors.
Slide 36 if you would. No,
All right, well, I can wait.
No.
Oh, that's a joke.
I'll speak for you guys, but I feel like our team feels very complete right now in terms of the numbers. We base the numbers in terms of those ratios on national numbers, kind of our community numbers, the needs of students, and I feel like what we have is allowing us to do both sides of the work, which is responding to student needs, but also being proactive. Things change as teenagers change, as times change, but for right now, I feel like we are in a good spot. Burnout in the roles of caring professions is real, and it's like a compassion fatigue. So I think the other thing this allows us to do is be able to have full teams that can help each other out, support each other, tap out. I'm having, a day, or it's been a lot this week. I've dealt with 2 or 3 student emergencies. Can somebody back me up? And again, that was not an option when we were dealing with the skeleton crew. And so I think we're mindful of that with one another and being able to support each other through some of that, like, kind of compassion fatigue moments.
Retention has been okay?
Yes,
Good,
yeah.
hopefully? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, take care of you, too.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff.
It
Thank
is,
you.
yeah.
I
We
thought
got
what
great
I was
people,
going to
though.
ask.
Go for it.
So I guess I was asking you, though, so if we've done the sophomore class, would there be an intention to do them, too, as exiting seniors? Okay. So so a student could potentially have this program and the screening done multiple times here at LT?
Yes. So right now, with our commitment to do 2 grade levels, the student would have it twice in their experience.
Okay.
How that would happen in the future, if we were to change the years that we would deliver, that
Sure.
might not stay true, or a student might have it back-to-back years, which, so we're thinking about all those factors.
Does that program change at all, or is it always the same then?
Yeah, I
when they
think
get
this
it
year,
delivered?
actually, Tim,
Yeah.
I think they had a new platform this year where they have
Yeah.
new updates. They have a middle school
Okay.
curriculum that's
Okay.
different from the high school curriculum.
Good,
And
okay.
so if a student does do it in
Yeah.
the middle school, they see a different video in
Great,
high school.
I
More
appreciate that,
appropriate.
too. That's helpful.
If you have it twice in high school, there's probably, there are
That's right.
some changes
Yeah.
to it
Okay.
if we've done it. If we stick with sophomore, seniors, there would be changes for the class of 2027 as
Okay.
seniors.
Great,
For the lesson that they.
yeah,
provided.
okay, that's awesome.
Different videos, different scripts, different lesson plans, right? We do it 6, 8, 10, 12 in Plainfield, and so our sixth graders aren't gonna get the same thing as our eighth graders, our 10th graders don't get the same thing as our eighth graders. Because they've developed that platform and expanded it over the
Great.
last couple of years.
That's awesome.
So I would be remiss to talk about student services work without sharing and explaining a little bit of what our student services problem-solving teams do and the work that looks like. We call it SST teams here. These teams meet for 90 minutes weekly, which is an incredible amount of time in a week. But it's actually really the most important time that we have together because it allows us to really understand the current state of the class. The people at the table of those meetings, our assistant principal of each grade level, myself, we actually co-facilitate each grade level team. The certified school nurse, 4 school counselors, 2 social workers, and our tapestry advocate for each grade level are at that table for the duration of the meeting to discuss students. Students are proactively added to agendas as well as we do consistent data reviews. So this team and this time is really focused on making sure that we're looking at the students, we're looking at grade and academic data, how are students doing in the classroom, that we're looking at attendance reports, we're looking at the use of mental health days, we're looking at behavioral referrals. We are combing the class each week to really make sure that we are trying to catch as many students and understand what they need. And the idea is as students come up on reports, as they're discussed, all the people around that table are there who know the student best and can report out and determine what our next best steps are. So the tier 2, so these teams inform our tier 2 support groups. In the student services world, this is a picture of a MTSS or multi-tiered system of supports triangle. Within student services, the lion's share of our work is in the yellow and red students, right? The green 80% is the universal experiences of students, whether that's group guidance, curriculum within the classroom, anything all students within the school would receive. We're really looking for students who are going through those experiences and need additional layers of support. And that's really where we started to look at how we are meeting those needs of the students in the yellow. Because again, previous to our staff enhancements, we were really dealing with the red and the very intense yellow. And so these specialized groups of the tier 2 student supports are centered around evidence-based curricula that would provide frameworks for teaching students skills in the areas that they need additional support. And a system of tier 2 supports for a grade level SST really deepens the menu of supports that we can use to try to make sure we're matching students with what they need based on what they're seeing about their performance in school. You can go to the next one for me, Brian. So if you look here, this was the list of supports that our team had developed for each grade level at the end of last school year. There's a bit of an art and a science in the facilitation of tier 2 groups. On one hand, as I mentioned, data is used to identify those students who fit the need, and evidence-based curricula is there to use as a framework. However, the art comes in to the team of counselors, social workers, and in their sense of their own professional strengths, areas of professional passion, and levels of comfort in facilitating small groups. So as you see within each team, there's different areas, both based on on identified student needs, but also just on the simple fact of who those team members are. We are new into this. We're continuing to seek out professional development. I'm very proud of our team and the number of professional developments that they've identified to ask to attend. They've started talking to other counselors at other schools, collecting information, and we've really just collected a menu of curricula that we can use to develop the supports. So obviously a 14-year-old freshman, their needs and who they are look very different from a 16-year-old junior. And so thus you'll see a different skills that we're building for those students, and also just simply the grade levels are different and who their students are and what their needs are. So, Mrs. Miller has been intimately involved in this work, and I want to turn it over to her and let her share a little bit about the work that she's done on an ongoing group that's been a real success.
Hello, everyone. I can go to the next slide for it.
I do have a question on this
Oh,
side, sorry. Oh, wait, so for the executive functioning under freshmen, why is it just outlined by boys?
I think that was specific, they had a specific one
Yes.
targeted for boys that data indicated needed that executive functioning support.
So what if you had a girl that needed the executives, would there be a separate group for?
Yeah, so for that one particular counselor who ran that one group, she had a group of boys on her caseload who either needed that support, parents requested that support, so she ran one specifically for boys. So it's not to say if we don't have that need, we wouldn't run it for girls. We also have a skills for student success class that we
Okay.
have, that's an executive functioning based course that we put students in. It's actually a credit bearing course as well.
Right, but if it was, but I'm just looking at the group, if there would have, you know what I mean, it could be appropriate for a female student.
100%.
Okay.
And again, this is one school year of the groups that were run. There are numerous.
I just
other
would hate to
groups.
see like a girl not be able to have that group because it was just for boys.
Groups are also fluid in the sense that they're by nature supposed to be like a time-stamped, skill-based intervention, and so they can be fluid throughout the year. So what could have started as an executive functioning group for boys, second semester could turn into, that same counselor could have a group of 5 girls that need it. And or if there's not a group that meets a student's needs, that can be done individually. We prefer
Yeah,
for
okay, so it
students
wasn't
to be-
like girls were excluded from it, that was.
Correct, no.
It was just, that was what the
It was,
need was.
that was the
Okay.
need one.
I
Yep.
just was, okay.
And that's how they're learning to build their groups, which is like, take a look at that data, what are the needs
Got it.
telling
Okay.
you?
Perfect. Thank you.
To work efficiently.
Yeah, and I think that's when Drew was talking about the data versus the art. This first year, many of our groups became groups because we looked at what we had. So where is our time being spent? Where can we be more efficient? Who needs us now? And then let's figure out how to best support them, learn from what we do, and then make a different, more targeted plan in those SST meetings to figure out who the next group is going to be. So if I worked with those kids for 8 weeks, now I want to see who are my next ones struggling, getting D's and F's in classes. I'm going to rotate them in for 8 weeks, and then we can start continuing to rotate who
So it's,
we're-
I like the fact that it's fluid, it just, it's concerning that it's just one gender.
No, absolutely. And I think Drew was trying to make sure to share exactly what happened in one year.
Got it.
This is just a snapshot of the specific groups that were
Okay.
run. And to segue, typically that's how it works. You pick a need, you pick a focus, you have a curriculum, you choose a timeline, you run with it. And that's how I started Poderosa's sophomore year. It was my first year transitioning from teaching to counseling, and I started seeing this as I'm trying to get to know all of these students. I was starting to see similar students coming in with similar issues, taking up a lot of time when I was panicking that I wasn't going to be able to spend time with all of my other students. And the issues were similar. They were fighting at home, there were relationship issues at school, they were struggling academically. And again and again and again, it was, I don't belong here, nobody cares about me here, I don't feel safe here. Being at school was not a good place for them. And so I was new-ish, not new to LT, new to this department, talked to Drew, we're learning about data, we were working with Dr. Gilfillan, it was that first year, I was like, I technically don't have data, but I feel like I have these things that keep happening, and he gave me the confidence to, capitalize on my teaching experience of multiple decades and being comfortable with students. I'm like, what do they need? What can you do? Figure it out and see what happens. So I decided to start this Tier 2 group, and it really became a place dedicated to supporting my Latina students that were struggling in school. That first year, it was only students on my caseload. I will tell you that I'm in my 3rd year. I don't have an 8-week rotation. This is a bi-weekly group that is now still going 3 years later. So I can share a little bit about that growth. It started really focused on community. So I really knew, as Leslie shared earlier, that if they don't feel good here, nothing else gets better, and the fights are going to continue, and the school refusal is going to continue. And so we wanted to work on giving them some strategies and some tools. So I started with more, how can we work on resolving conflict? How do we speak with respect to adults, but also honoring your own identity and not feeling like you're changing in this space? How do you have toxic friendships, right? It was a lot of those lessons with sophomores, trying to get them to feel good about relationships and feel better about their interactions at school, so that school felt like an okay place. And then we started realizing that their identity shapes their decision-making. We wanted them to be proud of that. And really, they just wanted a space to come to be where they didn't have to worry about how everybody around them was looking at them. We did some social, emotional activities. We also just did some get-to-know-you activities. There's a lot of strife among our Latina population. It's not just like them feeling othered. Sometimes they feel othered amongst themselves. They don't trust many people. So a lot of it was to try to help them feel empowered and to feel supported. as a group, and then also to see a friendly face. That was the other goal. Like, let's get to know a whole population of students that maybe you wouldn't have interacted with, so that you have more safe places when you're navigating these white spaces, which was a struggle for them throughout school. Fast forward to North Ames now. We are continuing all of that work. Since the Student Services Department has spent so much time working on restorative practices and using circles, I run my group as a circle. Every time we get together, it's a circle. I am so blessed and lucky to have Julie Jacobo. So I have collaborated with our bilingual coordinator, and she and I now plan all of our lessons and all of our activities together. My social workers are involved as well. We've gone from the first year when I had like 8 kids of mine that I was just trying to be efficient with time. Like, if I meet all 8 of them at once, then I don't have to have 8 separate hour conversations, to social workers making recommendations, teachers reaching out to counselors about students who they can tell feel less than or othered or aren't engaged, or they're failing all of their classes and they've mentioned that they don't care. So now this group has grown. We have like 20 to 24 students every time we meet. This is not typical. This is not an effective group in the sense of having a curriculum and being done in 8 weeks. A couple of the things that we wanted to highlight as well, in terms of the circles, when we talk about having effective conversations, this is really when the tough conversations happen. I mentioned navigating white spaces. It's really hard for them to know how to do that sometimes. And for them to now, after 3 years, be able to sit down and express what that means to them, that it's not like they're feeling extreme racism or anything like that, but they just don't feel comfortable or they don't know how to react, and so we just give them the space to talk about that and to give them some verbiage on how to communicate. These girls have gone from begrudgingly sitting with me every other week, sophomore year, literally going through a lesson on like toxic friendships, to last year, one of our most at-risk students, who's not on my caseload, she was referred to this group, snapped to us in the meeting, was like, wait, who's doing this at South Campus right now if we're here? And I was just like, well, I don't really know. Is that you guys here? And she was like, this can't be. Like, can we start working with some juniors? So we're going to start thinking about this semester, how can we somehow also start incorporating the junior class, because they kind of feel like they've created a legacy and they want to make sure that it doesn't stop with them, and the things that they struggled with since sophomore year, they can create a pathway for the underclassmen to start paying it forward so that that can continue to grow.
Fantastic.
This year, we placed a really strong emphasis on post-secondary support. So transitioning a little bit away from social emotional and really making sure they know what access they have, that they know steps, that they have support to even know what to fill out and when and how to do it. We had a presentation by Mr. Daly, our College and Career Center coordinator, specifically for them. That was one of our meetings. We just went to the College and Career Center, and he presented on all Hispanic serving institutions for them so that they knew where they could go to have a college space that looked more like them. We had a college field trip downtown. They got to visit 2 universities, and for many of them, that was their only time ever visiting a college. It was pretty emotional to see what some of us take for granted. For those of us that went to college and have visited many colleges, it was pretty great. And then we do little things like we played Loteria, which is a game for them. We decorated pumpkins around Halloween to look like Day of the Dead, you know, little masks and things like that. So we still sprinkle in that collaboration so that they can have their people. A lot of circle time around navigating the before and after holidays. It's a hard time for many of these students when they have to go home and be home for multiple weeks at a time. So that's another opportunity where we open the floor to them and we just run a circle, and there's no specific agenda. It's, we're going to be here with you, we're going to open up the space and go around and see what everybody needs. So this particular group has impacted many more students. It started as I'm new, can I do this? I don't even know if this is allowed, and it has now turned into something that crosses my caseload. It's the entire class, and now they want to start looping in all of the others. So I don't think this would have happened if we didn't have Julie Jacobo, if we didn't have 2 social workers, if I didn't have the space to be able to reach out and support other counselors, students, things that come up in SST. So this has been, I think, I'm biased, I guess, since I did it, but this is one of the very successful groups that we've had. Any questions about this?
Amazing.
Congratulations.
It's really great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
in addition to our Latina students and focusing on their post-secondary support, our College and Career Center coordinator, if you have not been able to interact with Mr. Daly yet, I hope you get an opportunity to do so. We're going to speak for him here, but he is doing so many things for our students. And he has also revamped how we use data to be more intentional with all students. And so we're going to do a little snapshot of that as well. These two, the image on the left is something Cody created that he actually shared with families so that they knew how students could access support. There are things that all of them have an opportunity to receive. We will talk to all of them about how to apply to college. We will talk to all of them about how to apply for financial aid. And then, as you know from being parents of the district and having students in the district, some students work really, really well independently. You give them a handout, you give them a video, you give them instructions. They don't want to listen to somebody talk at them. They want to sit down and do it. There are other students who just want a small group with a grown-up around so they can do it, but if they have a question, you're there. They have others that are one-on-one. They need you to walk them through it hand in hand, so that they know that they're doing it the right way. So Cody has created just this menu of support that is offered in all of these different formats. This year, the difference that we want to talk a little bit about is how this data is now being tracked. So while these supports were happening in isolation, in big, sometimes in offices, sometimes in the Reber Center, he's now we're tracking engagement in the College and Career Center, we're tracking individual meetings, they're tracking process completion, and then we are able to target and reach students that we realize are not doing the things. Now you can go to the next slide. This is also difficult to kind of see. The screenshots on the left are parts of the Google Sheets that we're using. So they're different categories, different columns. This data it's how we have survived from August through the November 1st deadline, the November 15th deadline, and then the December 1st deadline. We are able to look at every single student who has had an individual counselor meeting, a counselor meeting with Mr. Daly, if they attended a session after school, if they attended a lunch and learn session in the cafeteria, if they attended something in the College and Career Center, if they did anything that had anything to do with anything post-secondary, we have record of whether or not they were there, and then we can follow up with the students that we realize are not taking advantage of any of the things. This always existed. There was always data, there was always planning, but what is different this year, it was never organized, and it was never there for us to analyze so specifically so that we could make sure that we don't miss out on any students, and far too many students were slipping through the cracks before. Another thing that we did is we met weekly, not only with Mr. Daly, but with the other two members of his team in the office, Krista and Katie Byerly, who have been responsible for a lot of this data collection for us. And then also, because of their skill set, sometimes if the kids just needed something done on schoolings, if I was working with a student in a social emotional issue, they could just go and get help across the hall. And I think that collaboration back and forth this year, from anecdotally, has increased a ton from previous years, where that staff, our students see the whole staff. It's not just Mr. Daly. They see everybody in that office as a resource to go to, which is amazing. Another thing that helps with our weekly meetings is we can see, for instance, a lot of boxes are checked. Looks like a student is attending a lot of things, but then Mr. Daly will note, okay, but there are no applications submitted. So yes, they've come to a lot of things, but they have not submitted one college application. Let's check in, let's see what's happening, so then we can call that student in. So just that checks and balances where we can be like, oh sweet, I don't need to talk to that kid, I've done a meeting, he's attending all the things, and then we'll realize that maybe they do need something. School Links is another place where we are able to see what they've done and what they haven't done, so that's a data point for us. And then it allows us to continue to sort students. If I know I've got 25 kids that are actually interested in the military, when I'm having a college application presentation, I don't need to call them. When I know our military reps are visiting, I can filter the sheet and just contact those 25 students. Same with our career weeks that are happening. When we know students want to go to the trades, we know our reps are coming in from the technical schools, we can filter the sheet and make sure that we target those students. Our COD rep was here to help with applications. Every student who noted that they intended to attend COD, instead of saying, okay, great, you know what you want to do, we sent them a pass, so they came down and did the application with the COD rep. So we're just trying to be way more intentional than we've ever been before to make sure that students have the resources to do what they need and then to swoop them up if they think we're not going to find them, so that we can make sure that they actually follow through with everything. And then the last, if you go back one, this was just a few more resources or opportunities that students had. All students have these opportunities. This is just Mr. Daly's programming. He runs a boot camp for college applications in the summer, right before school starts in August. So 130 students were able to take advantage of that. I'm a former English teacher, so I don't know the math of how many of our caseload that is, but that many kids already had their applications set and ready to go before we even started school, which is amazing. Essaypalooza, they got help from college admission counselors to write their essays. Scholarship Club, he does this on the first of every month, helping the students know how to get the money that they need. FAFSA completion night, and then his Common App Lunch and Learns, 140 different students. So you might have one student who knows all of them, but from what we saw first semester, 140 students attended different sessions, which has just been amazing. So even if you're not identified specifically, there's extensive opportunities for students to get that post-secondary support. We know that this doesn't start senior year. By the time they get to us, a lot of this work has already started. SchoolLinks has been an amazing tool for our department in order to do that, and Drew is going to speak a little bit more about that as well. As long as there's no questions. I feel like you're letting me off easy today.
I did want to pass up the opportunity to just highlight a little bit about SchoolLinks, which is a new program that we've adopted and an incredible enhancement to the work that you just heard because of the power of the program. So SchoolLinks, philosophically, Mr. Daly and I think all of us in student services believe in really the idea of understanding your why. If you've been to Mr. Daly's presentations about post-secondary and college searches, it's really about why are you going to college is the most important question students need to answer. I went to a professional development about career pathways and some of the career exploration in high schools, and the speaker had a great line that I'll use forever. And she said, college is a very expensive career exploration experience. And so really it's our responsibility in high school to make sure that students are having these experiences to start to think about and go to college prepared, having eliminated the thought about what they might want to do. That's what SchoolLinks affords. It's an interactive, student-friendly, engaging platform. We've, as I mentioned, designed our group guidance lessons around SchoolLinks. Naviance is who our partner was before. Students were onboarded in Naviance as a junior. With SchoolLinks, we onboard them immediately as a freshman. It's an incredible, and so every year there's milestones that students are hitting. As a freshman, they do a Find Your Path assessment and receive 3 potential careers that their personalities, likes and dislikes might fit with. As a sophomore, they do another career assessment, and they favorite one career by the end of their sophomore year. Junior year, they set an official post-secondary goal, which is what drives a lot of the work that Tammy explained with that post-secondary team. And of course, senior year, they're in that process of really exploring what their path will be after high school. So SchoolLinks has really, it's been amazing. I think our team didn't believe how much our students would be interested in the program. The interface, if you've seen it, is kind of like Facebook. On the left hand, it just scrolls and you see if a student does an assessment today and then their name pops up for me and says, Kate Eder finished her Find Your Path. And so I will sit on a Sunday, I'll be at home and I'll sign into SchoolLinks, and I'll just see kids within the last 3 hours are on SchoolLinks. They're doing, they just requested a transcript to this college, so it's just incredible for students and for our staff to have such a powerful program. So a little bit of data that I just want to share to, again, just show you the interactive nature and the ability for us to really know where our students are. 97% of our students at LT have completed the Find Your Path survey. 73% of juniors have identified what they call their top skill. So again, going into the college search, they know what their top attribute and skill might be. 90% of sophomores have completed the Would You Rather survey, which connects them with a potential career cluster. 98% of all of our students have an updated goal, a major area of potential study or a training program that they're interested in. And 78% of seniors have submitted a college application as of this afternoon. So just having that information at our fingertips so quickly is really a wonderful attribute for our teams. So in conclusion, Although we've highlighted a few pieces of our work today, we do want to emphasize the importance of our team members having the capacity to work directly with students and consistently analyze all types of information to drive our work to ensure that we reach every student. The capacity and the time that our team is able to devote to understanding our students' needs is essential. So thank you again for supporting the growth of our division over the past few years. The real magic in the work as the student services personnel is what happens behind our closed office doors. Not only do we get to support those incredibly talented students who are going to absolutely change the world, they have their goals well defined and career resumes are finished before the end of their sophomore year. But we also are equally as privileged to walk alongside the students who belong to some of our marginalized populations, feel the least motivated to go along their educational journey, and are fighting the daily battles of mental illness through adolescence. The three of us today are a small representation of the school counselors, social workers, nurses, college counseling staff, assistant principals, administrative assistants, and many others who work together to make sure that every student at LT has a place where they belong. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think we're all very impressed. I mean, we always are, but it's really exciting to see all of the great progress. And just because there weren't a lot of questions about, the career in college, I mean, I've seen that progress over the past 4 years, and knowing what it was before, it blows me away, especially working at a university and seeing that these are the kind of resources. It's phenomenal. It really is impressive. So, thank you.
Any other questions or
Questions?
follow-ups?
No questions, that's amazing. Thanks for all the data too, everything you shared.
This was a lot of
so
work to put it
helpful.
together for us, so thank you.
Thank you guys again for
Thank
giving us
you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Group,
Yeah.
Tammy, thank you guys for being here. We appreciate
Great
it.
team. You guys are all great team.
All right. That was an awesome way to start the meeting.
A lot has changed in 3 to 4 years.
Love it. All right. Part 1, done. I gotta find my place. All right, next is policy and updates from Press 117 and 116. So, Dr. Waterman.
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention, as President Gretsch talked about, tonight's policy review is related to Press 117, which we have 20 recommended policy updates within 117, and then also Press 116, which we have 2 recommended policy updates from that. Rosenberg, thanks for being patient tonight, is here from Hodges Louisi to really help answer any press legal questions. And then, as always, Ed will kick off our discussion tonight to get started.
Thank you, Dr. Waterman. Thank you, members of the Board of Education. Tonight, we are presenting the first reading of policy updates from the Illinois Association of School Boards Press Service. These updates are part of the Press Issue 117 release, with 2 additional policies from Press Issue 116 that have also been included in this review. As this is a first reading, this serves as an introduction to these updates, and we will bring them back for a second reading and ultimate approval at the next board meeting, or possibly later if there are still some questions on some policies. As a reminder, the press service ensures our district policies remain aligned with current legislation, legal references, and best practices. All of these recommended updates have been reviewed by Jennifer Rosenberg from Hodges Louisi, as Dr. Waterman mentioned, who has provided a legal analysis for your consideration, and I believe the board has received that information as well. As it relates to the updates, Press Issue 117 has 20 policy updates that are included. Many of these revisions are administrative in nature, addressing updates to legal references, terminology, and responses to recent legislation. Additionally, several policies reference updated guidance and regulations related to Title IX. As Lyons Township High School remains subject to the 2020 Title IX regulations, any policies in this review that include Title IX updates will include some language and recommendations for the board to approve only the portions of the policy that are not affected by or dependent on the new Title IX regulations, which do not currently apply to our district. Another thing about Press 117, you'll note in some earlier materials from the Illinois Association of School Boards, it did include policy 5125, which is electronic communications, personal technology, and social media related. That is excluded from this review. This was recently updated by the Board of Education in August of 2024, and following the legal review of that update, we aren't recommending any further updates from that. So that was one that was included in Press 117 that we are essentially pulling because we've already been working through that. Press issue 116, the lion's share of materials within 116 are related to the changes in Title IX. And since we are still subject to the old Title IX or the 2020 version of Title IX, that is why we didn't move forward with those Press 116 recommendations at that time. But we do have two policies from 116 that we would like to review tonight. Those updates also address administrative changes and reflect the latest guidance from the Illinois Association of School Boards. As I just mentioned with some of the policies in 117, Policy 5100 within Press 116 also has a reference to Title IX, and you'll see in the materials that it is being recommended for approval with some exclusions to that new Title IX language. Members of the central leadership team, as well as our legal counsel, Jennifer Rosenberg, are available tonight to address any questions that you might have about these updates. Additionally, the board has received materials that include the suggested policy updates from Press, as well as recommendations from district council regarding any deviations from the Press suggested language. I'm happy to answer either myself or members of the CLT or Jennifer Rosenberg to answer any questions that you might have.
If I may, I want to jump in and go through a couple of, Joy has sent a couple questions in advance, and so I think it'd be good if I kind of talk through those for the whole board to discuss. The first one is related to 2120, which is board member development. There, if you have that policy in front of you, that section underneath mandatory board member training, which has 3 bullet points, that entire section is covered or addressed through the new board member training bundle that IASB offers. So that's just kind of a anecdotal footnote there. But the part that's in green, there's a new part. This is ongoing professional development related to adverse consequences of school exclusion, student behavior, which would be for new members. And I think, Joy, your question was, would that be something that the board might be interested in having for all members on a regular basis?
Yes.
So I think that was something that just kind of throw out to the board.
And I think the follow-up to that is, I'm sure as time goes on, additional training will come and be made available to boards in general. And it's more of a question of absolutely for new board members, but is that something that we as a board want to stay on top of, kind of like continuing education units, if you will?
Sure.
Just to be on top of whatever new comes in play.
I think that's a great idea. I would rather have it be instead of mandatory, recommended, that all board members engage in this. That way, we wouldn't run into a compliance issue if someone didn't or couldn't do it, that kind of thing. So that might be, I'm just thinking from us.
Yes.
I mean, Jennifer, I kind of read that update as a recommendation because it simply says that the board president or superintendent or designee shall make a reasonable effort to provide the training. It doesn't lock the board member into actually participating
I
in it.
wouldn't do it, but I just think I don't want to.
Is that how you read it as well?
Right, and I mean, what is kind of interesting, and to the point of the discussion about continuing education for the board, is the statute, the statute sets a minimum bar, which says the board has to go through certain trainings, including these that are outlined in the policy, within your first year of your first term. And then, of course, though, then the statute, though, has been added to over time, which means you could have been elected to the board, for example, before one of these new topics is added. And so technically by law, right, the minimum is set and you're not even required to do that. But as you're discussing now, I think there is, potentially an interest in having, ongoing continuing education for the board. And then deciding how you may want to do that as the board, whether through the IASB, models or bringing in them or other groups, that's certainly something that you can do. I think to the point that's made though about mandatory or how often you're doing it, yes, you want to make sure that you're not locking yourself into something that's kind of not an achievable standard,
Sure.
to the board simply, but I agree as to, this statement here about reasonable efforts to provide some of that ongoing, setting that bar and from a standpoint of like when you're able to do it or how you're able to do it, so then you have that discretion, and then determining when you as a board want to carry that piece out. So I recommend from a policy standpoint, keeping the language that is in the policy as written, and then you as a board yourselves then can determine when and how often you want to do any of the additional training, whether it's on this topic or any of the other topics that are covered.
I mean, here's a good example. So the exact terminology they use is reasonable efforts to provide ongoing PD to board members about the requirements of school code related to adverse consequences of school exclusion. That can be as simple as in a couple weeks, we'll be presenting the discipline improvement plan. It could be as simple as providing the requirements of the school code, all the way up to a completely different session where we bring in an outside person to train. So the continuum there is really up to the board. But I feel like the terms that are in there now gives the board the flexibility to do any of the above.
I just have a question that she raised. So like, as a board member, like you said, if the statute changes, what are we as a board member required to do? Because if, like I was elected and sworn in, I don't know, 2 years ago for the last term. So like the statute changes, would my requirements have to change with that statute, or is it at the time I was sworn in? Does that make sense? Like,
That's actually a very good question, and one that we've discussed in our office, because what is interesting is, I'm sorry, this is gonna get very kind of technical and nerdy lawyerly in some ways, but the legislature has a choice when they update and they add new topics. So, for example, in the last several years, they've added these other topic areas of the trauma-informed practices, and now this most recent improvement of student outcomes. Previously, it was always about, your leadership, your financial and your fiduciary duties, and those were the limited topics. When the board, or when the legislature, the General Assembly added these additional new topics, they did not go in and say, and then, like kind of existing seated board members, you have 1 year to also do this training. That is actually not an expectation in the strict reading of the statute. So the statute really just expects that a new board member would then do those. But to exactly your point, which is a seated board member and someone who maybe even potentially has been on the board for more than multiple terms, technically is not necessarily required to update these. One thing I would say is, let's consult also with IASB as to the way that they set up the modules. I also think it is a reasonable thing that you as a board may say, if there are new topics added, like some of these more kind of specific content area topics, even if the General Assembly kind of didn't contemplate this or mandate you to do it, it might be something you as a board that says, if we want to have everyone, make sure that they're also doing, the IASB module on the topic, so that we together, given that there's new requirements, are making sure that all of us are going through that. But, and especially also because you have to report out publicly, right, on the website, who's completed all of these different trainings. I mean, it's always a good thing, I think, from a continuing education standpoint, but that minimal requirement is first year within your first term. And so if something new is added, the legislature doesn't really, in their language, look backwards for existing sitting board members, for whatever reason that is.
And that, it's interesting, because that new training bundle offered by IASB includes those 3 bullet points. It was most recently updated in 2023 to reflect this. It's very possible that now that press is recommending this new information, that the next update they do could include that as well in the bundle. I mean, IASB's goal is to make it as seamless and efficient as possible for board members to be compliant with the training.
and I think like, because I took one of the trainings again when I was sworn in the second time, which
So
one was it, Marilyn?
The trauma-informed practices is now added in the new bundle for new board members.
Right.
But there's a separate training for existing board members to take just the
That's what it was.
trauma-informed
Just that
practices,
module.
Right.
which you did take.
Yeah.
Right, because I know, and then one of the other ones, I think I, did OMA again.
Yep.
And then I do remember, and is because I had reached out to you about that one was recommended that you do that on every, even though it wasn't required, they recommended that we do it every time a new member was sworn in. So I think they said that in that training.
I mean, I think that's part of it, right? And I know it sounds like many of you are very interested in that kind of thing. So that's something that like you as a board can set up and do. And I think IASB's goal is to make it, quite frankly, as easy as possible through their bundles and, kind of the individual, the individual modules. So that's something that, you might pursue, as a board. But the only caution I offer is if you start putting, mandatory requirements in addition to you on the board, then you need to make sure that you're, satisfying all of those requirements. So sometimes I think it is best to leave some of the more discretionary language from a policy standpoint, and then you, of course, can set board goals for yourself to, complete additional.
I think I personally would feel more comfortable with that than locking us in.
Yeah,
from
I
one more
absolutely did not
compliance
mean
aspect.
mandatory.
I was
It's not mandatory.
Okay, I just don't want to we inadvertently do something and then have that be.
Well,
a
and that's
violation.
I think if the board were to move forward with just adopting the recommended language that Press has put out, that would be what we'd recommend.
Yes.
Okay.
So that was 21220, sorry. The next question that came was about 4170, and this is related to AEDs within the school safety.
Yeah, it
And Dr. Owens took a dive into this one and can explain a little more about that.
We currently have 18 different locations for AEDs, so well above the recommended number, and that goes across all of our, they use the word attendance centers, so our school buildings, South Campus, North Campus, also Corral, but also our fields. And so we are in the final stages or finalizing our cardiac emergency plan. So myself, Dr. Tyrell, one of our athletic trainers, Christine Vins, we've been working on that, and we will be just collaborating with our school nurses next week just to make sure everything is up to date. We have all the plans, the trained personnel, what the response is, but specifically to the AEDs, we do have 18 different AEDs located across campuses and sports fields, so.
And I did get an update from my son, and he mentioned that they're always on the cart bomb.
Yes. So,
Thank you.
So we will have that plan posted on the website, but certainly we are in good shape.
Awesome, thank
That's
you.
what I thought too. I was like, I'm sure we have more than this. This like just one in the attendance center, 2 campuses. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Our campuses are much too big
I
to
know.
rely on one
No,
that's in
not
one
at all.
corner if you need to go.
Exactly.
We also, Vaughn Building was the other one I meant to mention too. It's not just on North Campus proper, but across the street as well.
Thanks, Leslie.
And then anything else on that one, 4170? The next one was 660, which is curriculum content. And I talked to Scott about this already, but he can give just a quick description or definition of that college and career pathway endorsement and what that refers to.
Sure. So the state has really been working toward developing more of a pipeline for students to get into careers, and not only just college, but also careers. So the college and career pathway endorsement is very particular. In order to get it approved, we have to submit quite a bit of information, including verification of dual credit, 2 dual credit courses, internship experience, as well as a sequence of courses that have different progressive skill levels. So if you'll notice in there, they talk about when those have to be in place, or at least not in this, but in the guidance. We have 4 approved pathways. At this point, we're supposed to have 1, but we have 4. We're working on a couple of others. The challenges are those internships and those dual credit experiences, but in any case, students are made aware of those from the teachers in those pathways and also from the counselors. It's also part of our academic program guide. What they get then is a state endorsement. We're not sure what that means, honestly, but they do get a state endorsement.
That's what I was
It's on their
wondering.
diploma, it's on their transcript, similar to other endorsements that the state has, such as seal of biliteracy and that kind of thing. That being said, I mean, if you're a student, for example, in our teaching pathway, which is the first one we got approved and it continues to be approved, the students will have 8 hours of COD dual credit experience. They will have been in classrooms. They will have taken child development classes and teaching methods classes, and they would have been in a preschool setting here at LT. So those students would go into college with an experience of that career. It's way more than just I took 3 or 4 classes in a row. So, and that's true of all of those pathways. So our business pathways are similar. Our technology pathway, the programming pathways, those students work with Mr. Tennant in the summer, and they're actually doing the tech work in the summer. So it's a great program, and it's one that we wish we could get more. It's trying to get, again, those internships and the COD dual credit aligned to make them happen. Those are the two biggest barriers, but we are well beyond what the state requires.
And I think the follow-up to that is, because they're state endorsed, does LT get a higher level of recognition for having 4 state endorsed programs versus just having
I
one?
think so. You know what we do get, if you count it getting, our funding for current tech ed is based on enrollment in our current tech ed classes. So the more students we can get into those classes, the more Perkins and current tech ed funding we get, which means the newer equipment we can have. So again, our aviation is one we're working on, and you know, getting that approved, we can update our flight simulators. We can use some of that money for flight time. We can buy new drones. You know, so all those kinds of things that then keep it current and relevant and interesting to students, sort of, is a kid magnet component.
Thank you.
So my question just to that is, does that mean that, is the question for us to include the new copy?
Yeah, so
Because we already have it? It sounds like we have it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we can include it, is what we're saying.
Yeah, so our recommendation for 660 is to adopt as recommended with the green language included.
Great, okay, that's what I wanted to be sure I was.
The only thing to add about that, because in that number 11, it talks about students engaged in career exploration and career development activities. You heard about it tonight with
Yeah.
Mr. Eater. So the students do that when
Yeah.
they're counseling groups. That is being recorded
Yep.
through Schoollinks, and we're then using that data to report our CCRI, our College Career Readiness Indicator information. So we're also developing that as well. And that's, the College Career Readiness Indicator will be part of our rating, our overall school rating. And so we're getting all those pieces aligned up, connecting the courses, connecting the surveys, and all those pieces, so we can get as many kids as possible into that indicator.
That's awesome. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Anything else on that 660? Okay, I wanted to highlight also 6135, because this is, if you could bring that one up in front of you, there's a number 5 in that policy that talks about the waiver of a course completion requirement under Board Policy 630, This is actually one that, as a leadership team, we are recommending the board not include in the updated language and remove that section 5. This would essentially, you know, enable us or require us to develop a process that would allow students to waive out of graduation requirements during their whole career here. And obviously, we'd have concerns about that Scott can talk about.
Yeah, I think ultimately, the accelerated placement program is a very new. If you see, it was adopted in June 20th of '23. Last year was the first year we actually identified students and did do accelerated placement. But there were some components to the policy that weren't very clear, and for some schools was very challenging. And one of those was, especially schools that don't have as many, and we offer 7 periods of courses. Schools that didn't offer that were having a hard time making a lot of this work. So there were a number of requests for some things, and the change in particular was this opportunity for a waiver if a student needed to get out of something in order to have access to the course. That's not our, we don't have that problem. And so we're more concerned this would open up other issues that weren't aligned with the accelerated placement program. We can fully accommodate the accelerated placement without number 5.
So again, that would be a recommendation to adopt minus the green language in number 5, to remove that.
Makes sense.
And then we also have to make a decision on the category of meeting or exceeding or just exceeding, is that right?
Oh yeah, Scott, can you talk to that?
Yes, so that was a concern raised by a number of schools that don't have 3 levels. So we have prep, excel, and honors. Schools that just have prep and honors, we're finding that they were moving many students up at the meets level that weren't really ready for that advanced work. So they were asking for a little lenience, or at least an opportunity to just focused on the exceeds. We've been doing both, and we have not seen that as a problem, and I think that's because we have multiple levels. So students who have those benchmarks and then placing them in those classes, we were tracking them and they've been doing fine. A couple of my colleagues at other districts have seen major movements down after those movements up. We've not seen that. And we've also provided the overall supports as well. I think part of that too has to do with, again, what you heard tonight, with those success teams and making sure kids are doing well in their classes. So we're fine with leaving it as it has been.
Meets and exceeds.
Meets or
Meets and
exceeds.
exceeds.
Meets and exceeds.
And that aligns with our work with equal opportunity schools. That system doesn't
that's a-
innately do a lot of the work that we're.
It's similar. It's the equal opportunity schools doesn't look at standardized test scores, right? It looks at the whole student, and it looks at interest, it looks at future plans, it looks at the behaviors and talents that they have beyond just the test scores. This is just test scores, and so they complement one another for sure. We did start to look at them and see if they overlapped, because we've already made our EOS recommendations, and now I just got the automatic accelerated placement recommendations today. So we'll be looking and seeing how many of them match or resonate. But a lot of, the thing about EOS though, it's for any dual credit or AP course, so it may not be the core. Automatic accelerated placement is just for English,
level.
social studies, science, and math. Right? And that's also kind of strange because there's only 2 years of a science requirement, 3 years of a math requirement, 2.5 for social studies. So it's not happening every year either. So it's really more freshman and sophomore year where you're trying to capture kids and move them up. And we're finding too with EOS, so the earlier you can catch kids, the better. The more ready they are and the more supports they have, they aren't sort of pigeonholed where they were, so.
Thank you.
Any more questions on 6135, right? The next question that came up was around 5120. 5120 recommends that the term school guidance counselor be changed to school counselor, but then in 6270, it still has guidance counselor. Jennifer, do you have any legal concerns with making that update to reflect school counselor versus guidance counselor?
Well, so, I'm gonna make sure I get the policies correct. So, the section 5 policy, where what it reflects is a statutory. So that's specific language
Okay.
that the General Assembly changed in that section 5 policy.
Okay.
So our recommendation there is that you're going to change it to reflect. And to be
Right.
honest with you, I can't give you insight into the General Assembly's logic behind why school guidance counselor versus school counselor, whether the universal term and how they've defined it. I wouldn't be overall concerned, right? Press will eventually also try to make things consistent generally across all of the policies, but specific to 5120 is really because of statutory change, so we want that to be consistent with, with that language, and that's what Press brought that there. And really because there's also, which kind of relates to some of the things, that we were talking about earlier tonight, is there's a specific change in there, especially as it relates to the interaction between those school counselors and when they're interacting with college and career organizations and their reimbursements and what their access are, especially as it relates to that conflict of interest and gift, and some of those types. So, to me, it's better that your policy reflects the statutory language. I think consistency standpoint, it's not necessarily defining
Okay.
any different type of individuals.
So when you're saying that it reflects the statutory language, I'm trying to desperately find our thing. I've just found it here.
That's okay.
With our terminology, like this chart that we used. So where does that, are we using the same terminology here? Because we have like school council, like, I just want to make sure our titles align with that.
So
Does that make sense?
We use school counselor because that's what's recommended by the American School Counselor Association as the updated term. They consider guidance counselors an outdated term.
And the statute similarly has now changed to remove the term guidance and now just refer to them as school counselors.
Okay, so if we're going, so I just want to make sure our terminology is coincides with that, so that would be correct. Okay.
So,
yes.
yeah, and so to piggyback on that, so
that make sense?
if
You
the
know-
board accepts the recommended press updates for 5120, you're good.
Yes.
But I think Joy's question, though, was 6270
Right.
still uses the term guidance counselor, so would there be a concern in changing that?
I'm not concerned, no, maybe it's.
And that's about, that's just overall guidance and counseling
Yeah,
program.
that's just overall guidance counselors, and I think that's where, what I would tell you is, it is likely one of those where press is just lagging there, and will catch up with that language as well. I wouldn't consider them like legally inconsistent in that.
Okay.
We're still talking
That's-
about the
okay.
same
Okay.
group of individuals, it's just more, as Leslie said, more a matter of just kind of the terminology of how we identify these, you know, the professionals in their buildings. whether it's kind of a more up-
Okay, I just want to make sure they were, okay, lined
I
up.
think, and you're fine in that way, I don't consider them, like I said, like legally inconsistent.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, yeah, so I would say, based on that, I would say leave it
Yeah.
as it is and let
That's fine.
press eventually will catch up to it, change that. Okay.
Sorry, can I
Oh, go
stay on
ahead,
this just for a quick second? Because I did have a question about the other counseling one.
6270,
Is that what it is?
yeah.
And it was more related to like, we're letting counselors know that they cannot accept any gifts or things from secondary, or post-secondary. How, is that something that's already been discussed with our school counselors? Is there a plan for how we're gonna roll that out? That just, it's very new. I mean, I'll be honest, we haven't
Yeah, let
discussed
me
it in
look
our
at-
district yet either.
Is
but-
that 6270 or is that?
It's
No, that's
5125?
5120, Employee Ethics Code of Professional Conduct and so it's the school council gift ban section.
Ed, what's your take on that? Is it different than just, that's gonna become different than our regular employee gift ban?
Well, there has always been within this policy the Gift Band Act, right? Within Press 117, a lot of the changes get to what Jennifer was talking about. They make it specific to the counselors. That could be something that once it's approved, if it's approved by the Board of Education with a recommendation, we could send out that information to counselors. Just make sure that they review it and that they're aware of those changes.
And it overlaps with our existing policy anyway, so we're not too concerned about it. Okay, thank you.
And the only thing I'll add to what Ed said is, part of what the update in the current law, so like there's been the existing gift ban for quite some time, then there was this addition of the school council gift ban in 2022. And then there's now, what this also creates and specifies, and really it's just more of a clarification in the Illinois school code, is it carves out certain actually allowances for your school counselors who do make trips to visit colleges so that they can provide more access and information to students.
Right.
That they actually do have opportunities to get reimbursed for some of that travel. And what the statute's allowing is kind of a carve out that says that just has to then be consistent with what the IRS allows. Because some of those kind of perks or privileges would usually be prohibited actually by the gift ban.
Right.
But, you know, the General Assembly is recognizing that there is a benefit to schools to allow your school counselors to go and have those opportunities, and therefore we want that to be able to be reimbursable, so they're creating a carve-out.
That helps.
It's interesting that it's not reimbursable already by our district, I guess. That's my thought. I didn't know, I mean, I thought that if our counselors did have to do travel like that, they would get, that we would support that.
We probably
We
would, but
support
they
that.
can't get it
We
from
do,
the
it just
school.
can't be above the IRS, like, per diem
Okay.
travel rates. You can't,
Okay.
you can't double, you know, for example,
Oh,
if you
sure.
submit mileage, you are not
Right.
supposed to.
Right.
Submit higher than, you know.
Okay,
So
okay.
you shouldn't be, I guess, rewarding them.
Right.
For that, it needs to
Right.
just, if we're gonna give them the carve out, that would be.
Brain's not on my head.
Obviously, Brian's not gonna allow that.
No.
anyway.
No, that's not happening.
I got you.
Gift ban.
That's why we get the
Instead, what
A
we
on
were
his
saying
audit.
is it was
Right.
allowable within the
Triple A.
statutes. So right, there probably could be some information that's shared with your, school counselors, and I'm sure Brian
Sure.
gets them. So.
We do.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let me make sure I get the right one here. So around policy 7160, this was around student appearance. There was a question about potentially removing the part of that policy that says historically associated. So that's something our leadership team actually talked about today. And we feel like that, by removing that, it could limit what students would be able to wear cultural, ethnic, or religious apparel. And so our recommendation would be to keep that historically associated term in the policy. Jen or Leslie, can you add any context to that from our conversation today?
I think today when we were just discussing that, I think the important part was really understanding the whole picture, really being able to connect to the historical impact, looking at hairstyles that have been legislated against for really minoritized groups. So that language would strengthen it, and also that other individuals who might not be of that historical group may now be using or wearing those hairstyles, that we were being all-inclusive by including that language. So we felt that it was better to keep it in.
I think if I look then at that policy, then with that, I would just recommend that the board adopt the language recommended by press, but certainly would open that up to any board discussion as well.
The only thing that I would offer as well is that the addition of that statement, and specifically the language about not permitting hairstyles that are historically associated with race, ethnicity, or hair texture, is the exact statutory language that the Jet Hawkins law requires when it was passed. Don't quote me on this, maybe in 2022 or within the last few years. So again, it's reflective, and press typically likes to adhere to when the statute requires the board to have a policy and specifically prohibit, they use the statutory language. And that's why our recommendation then is to stay consistent with press for that reason, especially when it is using the specific statutory language. Your board previously, so if you look at this update, you can see that underlined language that is in there, and in the different colored text. The board had previously added that sentence in a previous adoption, and then that's just kind of a press continuous update, just to kind of rephrase that, then the way the press felt was kind of reflective of the statute, as well as referencing the other board policy. So that's the only thing. It's not intended to change in any way how the policy is applied. It's just that's more of a continuous update from press. But the language itself comes directly from the school code.
Okay. And then the last one I wanted to highlight was 7200, which has it's in the out of school suspension piece that talks about the requirement of making an attempted phone call to the student's parent or guardian. That's something where we kind of feel like we would use that recommended language because it provides some flexibility for if a student or family doesn't have a phone, or if we're not able, they don't call us back, we don't get a return phone call from them. So our thought would be to keep that in there because it's a little more flexible than, I think the thought was, I don't have the language in front of me, but instead of saying, like, okay, I think your thought was a phone call with a notice of suspension will be made to, but again, leaving that as an attempted phone call would be our recommendation.
What number is that, Brian?
It's 7200 suspension procedures.
Yeah.
So it's that second.
20.
It's, what is that?
It's number 20, bullet point.
Oh, yeah. It's on page 62 of the packet, and it's item number 3 under out of school suspension.
Oh, I see it, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really good point that I had not seen, because I think attempted to be like, oh my God, I got really busy today, so, I was gonna make one, versus, we will make a phone call, if you can make one, because you do have a good point, if someone doesn't have a phone, or the phone numbers, they haven't updated the phone number, I mean, that's probably, would happen, where you didn't give a new phone number, they had like the work number, something like that. I would just say, they will make a phone call,
Right.
I feel like it maybe needs to be swapped, right? Like a phone call instead of.
It just seems
Yeah, I
like
guess
we
it
got
depends on how you
busy.
interpret attempted phone.
I mean,
I would
just like,
interpret attempted
is it-
phone call as you physically make the attempt to, not you thought about it, but you actually make the attempt to make the phone call and there's just no answer. But how would you interpret that in policy?
I think that's kind of my understanding, but to me, it's also, what is your expectation in practice, right, with your assistant principals who are actually doing this? I mean, my recommendation is generally to stay with the press language, and this is actually more almost we could probably wordsmith many of these policies.
Right. I was just thinking that. They're not all that
Right,
great.
we can all wordsmith many of these policies, but part of subscribing to the, the
Yeah.
press service helps you maintain your policies and regulations. The more wordsmithing you do, it like exponentially increases the work for press to support you and then your administrator to support you. So I think part of this is, I think this sets it out. I would not recommend changing the language. I think from a policy standpoint from the board. If the board though wants to kind of direct from a more student services standpoint to your assistant principals and others when they are issuing discipline, in particular an out-of-school suspension, if that expectation is that you, at the time of issuing the suspension to the student, is picking up the phone and saying to the parent, I met with your child, right, this is the, determination that is made in terms of the school rule violation, your student is going to be issued an X day suspension, you may reach the parent, you may not, or as noted, you don't have the phone number, then that at least attempt is made, it's going to be documented by your staff, right, and then then the written notice is what is obviously statutorily required that goes to them. I think that's a reasonable practice expectation. To be honest, that's kind of how I would interpret it, probably from a practice standpoint, a best practice standpoint. I would hesitate to recommend that you wordsmith this language, because quite frankly, it just makes future updates to this policy more challenging. But better just to communicate kind of what the expectation is to your staff in terms of if we are making kind of a simultaneous attempt at that phone call along with issuing written notice of suspension.
All right, so this is where I'm embarrassed to even ask the question. So, so if we have policy, right? So the policy says what we're gonna do, where would that come in when you do the direction? Because that's not under the policy.
Procedure,
So
right? Wouldn't that be our
Is it gonna be?
From an administrative procedure.
But that wouldn't be
it can even
something
be
we
like-
as a board would be doing, because we would only be doing policy.
Right.
Okay, that's, I just wanted.
I will say
Thinking back to our
unequivocally,
training.
I'm very confident and comfortable with the procedures our
Okay, that's-
AP offices, and have gotten, I think, strengthened over the years as well in terms of the contact and communications.
And with
we're
you
having.
reviewing, like, saying what attempted is, that was very clear, that that's a different interpretation than, like,
How it's
I didn't
written.
even read it when I
Yeah.
thought it, I'm trying to say, like, I didn't think anything of it, but then when we were having the discussion, so that would be, as long as you've communicated to us what
Yep.
the procedure is, because that would not be what the board sets.
Right.
The board sets the policy, okay. I always have to,
And Jill, when you go through the process of reviewing, your discipline and all of those types of rules even come before you. I mean, that's an opportunity for you guys to weigh in, on all of those pieces of it.
okay.
I feel pretty confident.
I think this is in our handbook as well, right? This policy is in our handbook,
Yes.
so.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So, okay, so like, I mean, this is like where we've done like our training, so the policy would then, so this is the board, that would
Yep.
be then put into the handbook, and then that's,
Yeah, I mean,
Different than what
that's
the
actually new though,
administration-
right? I mean, through the review that PTE-BIC did last year, they did the overhaul of the handbook code of conduct and linked the appropriate board policies that,
got it. So it's
Align
there
with
because
the
it's
procedures,
linked to
yeah.
it. So that way, when we update our, I know, like, I'm beating the dead horse, so I'm apologizing. When you update the policy, it will automatically be linked to this, so we don't have to go back forever. If we made a change here for one word, we don't have to go back to the there because it's automatically linked.
It's linked
so
to
we don't
that
have any
policy.
words. Okay. Thanks for going through that
yeah.
exercise. for
Yeah,
me.
it was helpful too,
Okay.
to connect all the
Because I was like,
dots.
that's not really, like, I just want to
Right.
be like very clear, like, because that's always a struggle too, that I think about what is our role as the board. It's the policy, but then where you were saying that was stepping away from the policy, but, okay. I'm
And
good.
then we would take this policy as a team through the AP office and make sure that our procedure follows all of the compliance within. So that a phone call is made and then a letter is sent home, and so we would outline that internally to say this is how we handle it.
Right, but then I think the concern though is like with the language under the attempted, but Brian explaining what attempted meant to him is much different than us not knowing what
Yes,
that is.
yes.
Okay. So, thanks.
Right, those are the ones I starred. Yeah, those are the ones I starred to discuss. And I would open it up for any other questions, thoughts from other board members.
The only question I had, and it relates to both press 116, 117 is, I'm sorry, 116, 117. So, because current litigation, a lot of these things we're not addressing, which I understand, will there be a time that once litigation has been resolved, that we'll come back to these, even though it's not going to be a press release, or how does that,
Let Jennifer
how do we
handle that one.
address that?
So that's a very good question. And quite frankly, even just press itself as an organization has had to try to figure out how do we manage, because now they have members of the organization, right, that subscribe to their service across the state that are impacted differently by the status of the Title IX regulations. And so that's something, your district is in constant contact with them as related to it, and that's why we wanted to make sure to get the issue 116 updates that are non-Title IX related implemented, so they're in your policies and carried forward and not kind of forgotten about, for example. To be honest, the Title IX piece, we from a legal standpoint, we are constantly, monitoring that. We don't know what that legal status is going to be. So, for example, the litigation, the Kansas District Court case that was kind of in that cover email to you right now, there's been no final decision on that. We, are going to be waiting to see what the Department of Education under the new administration, when it comes into place later this month, does as it relates to the Title IX regulations. Just kind of for step back historically, right? So the first set of Title IX regulations, the 2021s that came into place, that was a 3-year about long process. Then when they were just updated under the last administration, it was again about a 3-year long process from 2021 to 2024. If this incoming administration then goes through because regulations, once they go into effect, have the same effect as any law that is passed by Congress, for example. If they want to go through the formal process of undoing them, that may take some time, or change them further. And so what we may then see is, for example, an executive order or the Department of Education taking some other sort of different position also then that communicates to school districts, either that are in your position, which is currently the 2020 rules apply to you because of the ongoing litigation, or even to any school district, right? So even the school districts that are now following the 2024 rules, there might be something that comes from the Department of Education or the new administration that says, you should stop following that set. So press is going to have to try to figure out how to somewhat deal with this very dynamic situation. 2 things what I will say. So that in that way we'll keep following it. And you're right, at some point in time, your policies may need to catch up if the rules stay as they are. Or what we may see is a new set of policy changes for everyone, and it will look different for those of you that have stayed under the 2020 rules and that set of policies that was initially adopted, or, and then it may have to look different for those that did not update to the 2024 set of rules and policies.
Yeah.
So we just don't know how that's going to play out. But I guess the one good thing we know is for your district, right now you're going to stay under the 2020 rules.
Right.
We'll see if the new administration announces something different, but at least that's kind of the playing field that we're on. The second piece that I will mention, because this happens with some districts that then raise the question of, well, aren't there new or different protections that came out of the 2024 rules? And then where does that leave us as a district like yours that's in the position of still following the 2020 rules? Also remember that we have state law in Illinois that interfaces, and kind of with all of these different protections. So there are certain things that federal law, Title IX protects, but we also, for certain groups that were expanded under the 2024 set of rules, already exist in Illinois law. It's just that it wouldn't be considered, for example, a Title IX violation if you had, discrimination on the basis of someone's sexual orientation or gender identity or any of these new kind of additional categories that were added in the 2024 Title IX rules. We have state law under the Illinois Human Rights Act that protects those, and you're just going to process it under a different policy and through a different process, but you're still going to investigate concerns related to that and still respond to them. So it's not that, I don't view it as like a gap in terms of protections for individuals and students, for example, in your buildings. It's just more about, are we dealing with it under federal law versus state law? Because that's a question that also comes up when we're in this kind of limbo period with where policies are.
Yeah. So thank you, because that really helps clarify. The only, I guess, follow-up to your first point is if we are in the position where we do need to catch up, and I'm going to ask potentially an unfair question because I know you don't work for press, but do you anticipate that press then, once resolved, would then come back and say, here's the things that those districts, because there's a lot of us, need to do to catch up? Will they then push that out to us as part of their program, the service that we provide?
I feel fairly confident in saying, I have not asked them that specific question. I feel fairly confident in saying yes.
Okay.
Because, so part of that is, so I am and have been for the last 2 sets of policies part of their Title IX working group. So when the new policy, when the new regulations came out in the spring, we worked during the summer to push out that new set of policies to be ready to go, August 1st for the school districts that needed to adopt them. So I feel for accountant, there's always gonna be a little bit of lag time to develop that. Press, they are aware, but it is also an onus on certain districts to say, and I know you guys have been in communication with them, Maryland has and Dr. Waterman has, to say, we're sitting tight, kind of holding, holding on the 2020 rules. So in that way, you're kind of on their list.
Right.
So they will know, our office knows. And so in the event that, so for example, say, and it can kind of change on a dime fairly quickly. Say all of the litigation was resolved, and immediately the Department of Education said, you all need to be following the 2024 rules now. That was something that could have happened, in October, November, maybe it will happen. You'll have an opportunity. The good thing there is press has those policies ready. You'll have an opportunity to have them presented to you and fairly quickly be able to do that. I also will say with your administration, we did training on that for your staff at the start of the school year. So they have knowledge of what's contained in the 2024 rules, even though we are still implementing the 2020 rules, as it relates to any Title IX matter that comes up. And kind of similarly, vice versa. I think possibly with the new administration, we might see kind of the other 180 of it, and so it might be other, you might see changes in different ways. But I think press is aware of that, and we'll make sure that information is communicated to all of you, and, certainly within our office, we are monitoring, that as well, and we'll push that information out.
Thank you. Very helpful. No, that's very helpful.
Thankfully, it's all easy to understand and easy to follow. So.
Yes.
You'll just be hearing from more policy stuff all the time.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Mine are not related to Title IX this time, but I was going to ask, so you're okay now, Jennifer, you can probably sit back for a minute. This might even be more for Brian. I was looking at the revenue and investments under 430.
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah, now we're talking, right?
Definitely a Brian
Yeah.
policy to answer.
Sure.
Right, because I saw that the question, what's the question?
The option?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more to us? The outside versus inside, the within, and
Yeah, so what's the best way to explain this? First of all, having gone through and reading this, the option of investments outside of the Public Funds Investment Act,
Right.
I don't really know what that is yet.
I was kind of wondering that myself.
Jennifer, I don't know if you've heard anything different. I've had conversations with PMA about this, who we work with financial advisors, and we're still not really sure what investments allowed under another law means. I don't really know what that is.
That's why I was curious. I was like, I've never heard of anything like this.
So that's the uncertainty part of it.
Okay.
Let's go back to the Public Funds Investment Act, which, by the way, I would recommend at this time, until we maybe learn more or something else, other information comes along, that we kind of stay within the Public Funds Investment Act.
Okay.
Look, I've been doing this a long time, and I like the Public Funds Investment Act because I think it really puts forth the point. It's even in our own board policy where look, the return on investment is, I think, tertiary to the fact that you protect the principal, those types of things. And I really like that because it is public money. And so under the Public Funds Investment Act, really what we're investing in is CDs, potentially bonds, treasury notes, maybe some commercial paper here and there, money market accounts, interest-bearing accounts. And really, for the most part, that's it.
Yeah.
It is either protected 100% by FDIC, so up to $250,000 at each bank, or other collateral agreements.
Right.
We have one with FNBC where they have more of our money, so we have an additional collateral agreement with them to collateralize that. Or all of the investments then are fully collateralized. So if we go out with $1 million CD someplace, that's fully collateralized. So the principal of all of the money is protected. And so really, that's the way I like it, and I think it makes the most sense to really leave that in place until, I think, potentially, maybe there's some additional clarification, but I don't really know what other clarification there would be. I had one, in my discussion with a representative from PMA, they had one thought on this, and they said, when you go for like commercial bonds, okay? So you're not in a municipality, you're not buying municipality bonds, meaning that you're not buying a bond from another school district or a municipality, you know, the library, just whatever, when they're selling bonds, but you're in commercial, that, you know, the Illinois State Treasurer can go out up to 10 years on those, right? And so that is like the only example of anything that they have that says, well, that's kind of authorized in the state of Illinois by the Illinois State Treasurer, but not necessarily authorized by the Public Funds Investment. So I guess what I'm saying is with that uncertainty that's there,
Right.
I think it makes sense to leave the Public Funds Investment Act language as our, you know, as our policy.
Okay.
And I think in the future, if that changes somehow,
And it's
then
described
then
what
you're
it
right, and then we revisit that.
Regulated.
Right, and then we revisit it and look at
Which
it.
essentially means recommending to adopt it as presented, like adopt the. press
100%,
policy,
as
yeah.
presented, because we would still add the paragraph that talks about the local banks and that sort of thing, which I think is perfectly fine. And then the amended to amendatory, I
yep,
think
yep.
that's fine. So really, what it comes down to is exactly what Dr. Waterman said. We would have the policy adopted as presented.
Okay.
And if any additional information comes along that I think would be helpful as far as the investments go, we could bring that back to the
Right,
board
okay.
and talk about it at that time.
Yeah, I had to ask that question because I wanted to know.
I'm glad you did.
Is there some,
Yeah, the first time I read that, and I still, to this day, I'm reading, I'm like, what does that mean under some other law?
yeah.
I don't know. Jennifer, do you know?
I mean, and that's where it's like, is the General Assembly even thinking of something contemplate, like in the future?
Sure.
That there might be some
Right.
other law that allows, but as Brian talked about, right? Especially when you're investing public dollars.
Until you
And
define that,
If
I
you
know.
do, and not that any of you need to go digging into like all the real in-depth language that's in the existing press policy or that act itself, there are a number of enumerated places where you already can invest your money from that, you know,
Right.
from
Correct.
from the act. And so I don't think Brian probably thinks that it's limited in any way, and it's like you're putting it in safer investments, you know, in safer investments.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And the only other option then is the press sample policy actually lists out all the categories that are in the Public Funds Investment Act. If
Uh-huh.
you wanted them to appear in the
Yeah.
policy. You've always chosen
Okay.
historically as a board just to keep it simplified
Yeah.
and stated as
Yeah.
allowed by statute and then as amended, which is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. There's no reason why you need to enumerate how all 9 dozen, you know, or,
Right.
you know, whatever it, you know, it happens to be.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Great.
So I agree with the recommendation to just,
Thank
you
you.
know, adopt it as presented.
Okay, good. That's
Yep.
really helpful.
Long-winded answer to get there, but yes, that's
No, I
correct.
appreciate it. I'm glad you explained that to
It
me.
makes you think, and then it makes me talk to like the other people in my office, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a finance policy on here, I need to go
Yeah.
consult with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So hopefully that answers that
It did.
question.
It did.
Other,
Yeah. I think there's one more, or two more, maybe one more. But at least, I was confused, on 7-100, health, eye, dental exam, why are we suddenly not having to provide information about the vaccine?
Just for meningococcal vaccines and disease.
Because if we have to have proof, above, when you read the beginning, it says proof of immunization against meningitis. Say that again. Disease is required for students in grade 12, so they have to have proof of it. But then why would we not provide information? If we're providing information about the flu vaccine, why would you not, it's kind of silly.
Changed from the Illinois Department of Public Health's recommendation.
That's the only reason why,
I really
right?
no better explanation than that. Simply, it was actually something that was added several years ago. And quite frankly, when you as the school district have the obligation to provide this information, right? Quite frankly, it's another piece of information that you all have an obligation to provide. And you're also relying on other state agencies to give you the information to provide. So I don't know, kind of the rationale behind the Department of Public Health's change there, which is what resulted in the change in the school code. But that is their statutory, that's the statutory change that went into effect is you as a school district no longer have an obligation to provide this specific information to families.
Even though that it is.
Do it, but the policy is, that is the update.
Even though we're required to have them provide proof that they've had it done, the vaccine done. So
There
where
are
do they
other
get that, so where did they get that information
Right,
from?
vaccines, part of this is, I think, over time, as the Department of Public Health has sometimes tracked different spikes in different concerns of communicable diseases.
Yeah, I
and
get
other,
that.
You know, things that students can receive vaccines about. There have been pushes from an education standpoint to provide information to families. And so I think that's when you've also seen additions in their regulations and their recommendations
Okay.
to make sure that information is being pushed out to families. And this must be, for some reason, a pulling back on that recommendation.
They're saving some
Just
trees.
from an education standpoint,
Okay.
right? You providing information to families. You know, they're still required to get vaccines and provide proof of it.
Okay.
And there are other vaccine students are required,
Sure.
that we don't have to provide information.
Information
for.
on true, okay. Yeah, okay. It just seemed a little like, probably, back to your point about them, if they actually really reviewed and looked through the whole policy sometimes, might reword how some of this stuff is written, so.
And that's challenging, right, is because many of these policies exist for a long time, and then you
Yeah.
get all of these updates from law, and press is always trying to figure out how do we best fit this information in.
Yep.
And that fourth point about the district providing informational materials is actually a more recent kind of addition to that policy, because it's never been something where families are required to provide specific information.
Right.
Information for students. But you as the school district to have the obligation to provide information to families, right, it is an obligation and a burden. You know, the school district, especially again, when you're relying on IDPH to provide it. So for whatever reason, they've changed their guidance, and that's why there's the change in the law.
I think it's the trend of the breakout, because flu vaccine is not something required of students either.
Right, that's right, but we provide the information about it, okay.
Right, it's more of a public health educational
I just, okay,
approach.
don't make sense. Don't try to make sense out of this stuff
No.
sometimes.
Not when it comes to the Department of Public Health.
Fair enough, but, okay. Then I have one, I think this is my last question. Sorry, guys. It was policy 5230, the student discipline policy. So I know that, you know, there's a lot of talk of there's going to be another update, in 118, which is coming out this spring. I mean, since those changes are kind of minor, does it even make sense just to wait to update the whole thing again? Like, I don't know why we need to update. Like, maybe it makes sense just to wait for 118 and, like, just put it off and update it with 118.
So what I wanted to do is twofold. So the state law has gone into effect January 1st.
Okay.
So the reason, so press tries, so this is the October update, knowing that
Okay.
boards work through this over the course of several months.
Sure.
Press tries to kind of get ahead of as many kind of effective dates of new laws as possible, right? So this was passed during the summer by the General Assembly. They got it into their fall update to put before all of you, so that if they're hitting a January 1 effective date, your policy is going to be updated as close as possible, right, to that effective date for the change of this definition as it relates to corporal punishment. The reason why 7190 I guess is delayed almost one more set of policies is because there's actually more substantive. There is another law that is impacting that policy that goes into effect July 1st. I will save you a little time because we will talk about it when that update comes out in the spring. It's more complicated, and so it is something that they are still continuing and refining in 7190. And press has just a general practice of not putting a policy before a board in 2 issues in a row. So they weren't going to include 7190 to address this same corporal punishment update, to then come back to you in a back-to-back issue in March or so, whenever it's put out, and say, all right, well, you just adopted this 7190 in February, when you probably have your second reading on this, but now you're going to need to go through this policy again. So that's why press is holding on to 7190, because you're going to have a bigger update due to other statutory changes that apply to that policy. But they're getting 5230 finished and up to date because it's implemented and it's a more narrow change just like that specific policy. If we want to, we can hold 5130, but my recommendation would be to update it now because you at least want that to be as compliant. Plus, quite frankly, it just makes it easier from a press process standpoint.
So, and then my question with that is so if 5230, that won't be in that 118 is what you're saying?
No.
It's what's referenced in
Unless you direct press to
7190.
hold it.
Okay.
If you adopt it, as recommended now in 117, they'll make that update, and then it'll be your existing board policy, and then 7190 will catch up in the 118 edition.
I guess I'm just wondering if like it's important to see these things collectively together, since they're impacted by it. I'm serious. I really do think, I mean, it's kind of, it seems like a pretty big deal. I don't know, does anybody else feel like that? Am I the only person?
What I will say is this piece in particular is, to 7190 as a policy, is discrete.
Okay.
The other issues that will be in 7190 are independent of this,
Okay.
this change.
Of
as it
what's
relates
happening,
to the
of what this
definition
content is here.
punishment,
Okay.
And what this changes.
Okay.
So in that way, and like, you certainly could choose to hold it over. I'd recommend updating it now, partly just like I said, from a press process standpoint, but also because the law went into effect January 1st. Then you know you have this policy updated and 7190 will follow. And it will be essentially a aligned, consistent change to it. 7190, the rest of the policy will have bigger changes based on a different statute.
We can just make a note.
Yeah, that's fine, I mean, okay. I'm the only one who's feels that way. I just wanted to be sure, okay? I think I'm done with my questions.
Other questions?
Thanks, Jennifer. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
So
Thank
we
you
will sort
very
through our
much.
notes from tonight and bring this back for a second reading and approval on in a couple weeks. So,
Yep.
thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. and being
Yes, Jennifer,
patient.
thank you.
Appreciate that.
More than welcome to hang around for textbook discussion. if you want.
Everybody's waiting.
She looked very engaged for our first part of the.
I know.
It was good, right?
To be honest, I love hearing that kind of stuff though, because
Yeah.
it's so nice to like actually hear some of
Yeah.
that day to day, and I'm sure it's for the same reasons for all of you.
Yeah, it
You know, I
is.
get to sometimes see all those positives.
That's good.
Well, we appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming.
You're very welcome.
All right, our final agenda item is curriculum and instruction and the first reading of the 2025 textbook approvals. Scott.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we do have the first reading here of the books. One of the things I like to do is sort of look historically, and I'm just going to preface a lot of this by clarifying how we do textbooks as well. LT is unique in that we still have a rental program, in that our students pay $75 a year, and then any consumable books, so those would be books that they are usually paperbacks, we have some of those up for adoption this year, or workbooks and that kind of thing, so they pay for those. Most schools have every student, not unlike college, buy everything every semester. So our textbook fees toward kids are much, much lower than they are in most any other school. That being said, they're not cheap. I mean, that, I don't want to pretend that this is, that it's charitable, but you'll notice, though, over the history, our textbook costs have gone down, and that's because of a couple of things, a couple of factors. One is we have been buying online access to books in some areas and keeping class sets. So if you look all the way back in 2013, roughly $65,000 of that $240,000 was for one book in one class. And so even today, if you look at the cost of textbooks, let's say there's probably 800 kids in Algebra 2. If we were to buy one book, roughly $120, that's going to be $100,000, right? So our teachers aren't using textbooks that way anymore. We are looking at more online opportunities, and you'll notice in what's being proposed this year, a lot of access to online actual curriculum, not necessarily a book. So with that, just to go through what we're looking at, making some requests for. The other piece is we do like to hold on to things for more than 5 years. With our class set model, we're actually holding on to things quite longer. So that's one of the things you'll see in here as well. So this begins on page 106 for you. If you want to go to the first horizontal chart, I believe that's on page 108. This is where each of the individual requests are listed. Then I actually have the paperwork additional, but this, I find the summary easier to discuss from. We are looking to replace the AP Psychology book. Every time AP changes a course, they change the need for the book. AP Psychology, as you can see, is not a cheap book. It's $166 per. This is the book right here. And we have about 180 students enrolled in that course. You'll also notice, though, that under consumables is for $40 for the student to have access to not just the book, but also the activities aligned to it and the practice tests for the AP tests. So this is, of the requests, the most expensive one. The district will be purchasing $30,000 worth of the textbook, and then the students each year would be spending $39 to have access to the online materials. From the student perspective, that's a pretty good deal. And from the district's perspective, we're going to be able to keep this book now till they change the AP test again. So in that sense, we're going to get our money's worth out of it. So that's just, again, a way to kind of get you to understand how we do all this. But then you'll notice the very next item up under district purchase text is Code HS. Code HS is a programming resource. It is the actual curriculum for a number of our programming courses, so Python and some others like that. They sell this by teacher. So in this case, we're buying 4 teachers worth of materials, and they can use it with all their students. So this is something, again, that it will become the backbone of the course. It will be the way that they're able to program and have access to the programming language and have access to sandbox areas where they can program things and not destroy our equipment or our network. And so that then is, those 4 teachers would need that, and that will cover a series of courses. So as you see, as we go through these, textbooks have changed. The whole concept of purchasing this sort of stuff has changed with digital content, but it is required of school boards to approve the curriculum materials. So that's why we're going through this and why you're looking at some software stuff that perhaps you might not have seen before. Accounting 2, SimNet Excel is, again, it's an online accounting opportunity for the students to use. That is something the district will purchase, and the students will have that as the curriculum. Our flight simulator is from 2006, so that's old. We're upgrading that to 2024, which is great. It's an opportunity for our students to have access to a lot of new airports and a lot of new things that actually match the planes that they'll be flying and using. And then for our private pilots course, there's a Take Flight Interactive, which is actually an AI-based instructor to give the students in the private pilot course more feedback on their flying. So if you've ever used a flight simulator, and I've used a few of them, you can take off, you can crash, you can take off, you can crash, you can take off, you can crash, and you'll have to figure out what you've been doing wrong. The AI simulator will explain to you what you're doing wrong. It'll give you suggestions. It'll give you guidance in the air depending on the degree of support that you want. So we think that's a good thing. The more opportunities you have to learn that way, the better. And so that's that option for the pilot's course. The 4 for biology prep and Excel on the cells, this is something we've been looking at for a while. If you're familiar with our freshman biology course, it is a storylining course, which means everything that they're learning about biology is based on a story. And one of them, it has to do with wolves, for example. And you learn about the life cycle of wolf, what wolves eat, what's in their environment, what eats wolves. And through that, they're learning about all the pieces of biology in a context. We've been doing that for quite some time, but the teachers have felt, going through curriculum review, that in particular, cell and understanding the cell has not been a very successful unit, that it's not fitting well in that storylining. So they would like to purchase this curriculum, which includes teacher editions, teacher resources, an online portal, teacher portals, They'll also sell you all of the lab equipment if you want. We don't need it. But in looking at making that work, they want to pilot this specific unit. So that is what is being requested. So the online portals for the kids, it's $5 per kid. And because this is a pilot, we're requesting to make that part of the district text. If we go into making this something that we're going to be using every year, we would move that into the consumable and the students would pay for that each year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So that's everything that the district is on the hook for, so to speak. That's where we get the $65,177.90 cost. The other request, one is a class set of geometry concepts and skills for the PSD class. This book is already being used in other special ed geometry classes. We have the books, and so even though it says there's 65 students and it costs $25 per book, we have the books. So all we're doing is putting it as an approved course, as approved book for that course, so there's no cost there. In the consumables, in addition to the AP Psychology that I talked about, we, over the last few years, have gone away from, in our English classes, having every kid reading one novel, and then the next unit, every kid reading the same, every student reading another novel, but it's all the same by all the kids. We're doing a lot more student choice. And so what you'll see here is basically doing, between the dropped books and the additional books, we're dropping some things that aren't being chosen by students. We're adding some things that are more current or might be of higher interest to students. So the way we purchase these, we purchase them, the students will say which ones they want, the bookstore will order them, we charge all the students a flat fee, and it covers our costs. So that's what we're looking for this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions about specific books. These books, the reason why they're here is not just as lovely props, but they, by school code, need to be on display for a month. Any community member is welcome to come and take a look at these books. If there are questions that people have about the electronic or digital curriculum, I can certainly share that with them as well. You can go online and find that information out as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a quick question. On the number of enrollment column, is that based on this year's current enrollment, projected enrollment for future years? I mean, that number could obviously
Yeah, it can always fluctuate, and these are certainly not the exact numbers. We don't know where it'll be exactly, but we're usually doing an estimate. So we have about 900 of our students in biology, for example. So that's the number that we're using. It could be 925, it could be 875. A lot of times we're looking at the sections that we have right now. We have 2 sections of accounting right now, so we're looking at 52. That's 2 sections, 26 per section. A lot of times that's how it works. For the Take Flight Interactive, we have 32 computers, so we're getting 32. Right, so it sort of depends on the group. 180 is a pretty round estimate of a historical number for AP Psychology. So
if there's a rush of students that, 250 that want to take AP Psychology, I mean, what would that do to your numbers? Do you submit a?
No, so
request.
what you're doing essentially is you're approving the purchasing of these items for these courses. And then Brian and I sit down and we put together a budget. And so Brian's budgeting for textbooks based on overages, based on price fluctuations. Approving these textbooks now means we can purchase some of them out of this year's budget as opposed to next year's budget, so we can get some savings there. We can, realize some different costs that way too. Sometimes we'll need to get used books. We can't find, them. And every year we have damaged books, we have lost books, we have things where we will have 20 more kids and we need to find 20 more books. So that's all built into the budgeting process.
Okay.
But for our purposes and to get sort of a historical comparison, we use these estimated enrollments.
Great, thank you.
I guess just one question. You opened up talking about how we do a rental system, which is cost supportive of our families, and I know our students that are free or reduced, there's supports built in for them as well. But is there a way, if I choose to say I don't want to pay that, I'm just going to go to the library and rent out these books, is that an option for students, or do they have to pay that?
Well, the $75 is for everybody, whether they choose to go get it. Now, if there is a consumable, when they go in and pay their fees, they have the ability to collect off at certain consumables. So, let's say, you've got 3 kids in the same family and they've all taken the same class and they've got that book at home and it's well marked up, they're only gonna buy it.
Everybody, just send them to my house.
Yeah, that's
and we'll
right.
get books.
Yeah, how many Great Gatsbys do you need to have?
I'll let you know. Have a lot.
Well, yeah, you have the opportunity to not choose them. Now, as far as the those reading circle books, that's all we do charge for that because those do change from time to time.
Some great choices, and I was reading through some of those. So that's
Yeah, I always appreciate the rationale when you send that support documentation for what the changes are and why, and then I love Toby and Karen, they always come up with some good reading selects that make me think, okay, what am I gonna add on my list?
That's a good point. This is not the only time we look at textbooks.
Yeah.
Again, these are the ones we know for sure.
Right.
This gives Brian and the bookstore the opportunity to purchase things under this budget. What I have been doing or allowing, and the board has been also allowing, is coming back with another round in the spring. Our courses in curriculum review are looking at making some changes. Our languages, 3rd and 4th year languages, are looking to make some changes. Those tend to be a little more expensive as well, so we may have some of those coming forward. So again, there will be more things coming in along with summer reading recommendations and that
Those
sort
are
of
great,
thing.
too.
So that'll be most likely April.
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Any other questions? No?
This would, of course, come back 2 weeks for a second reading and
Weeks
approval.
for approval, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for walking through all of that. All right. That's everything on our agenda. Public participation, but we don't have anybody here, so it's safe to think we can wrap it up. So may I please have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So,
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate
Happy New
it.
Year. Have a great week.
Happy New Year, yeah.